Chapter 398. Traditionally, if a commoner's wedding could be witnessed and blessed by the local nobles, it would be a great honor. The great lord would request the king to be the witness, and the king would request the emperor to be the witness. Historically, the emperors of the empires would also invite the chosen of the gods they believed in to bless their weddings. Generally speaking, such a situation where they could not find a host or witness was very rare. However, this did not apply to Caesar. First of all, he was the supreme monarch of the north. Like the elven king Cajo, Whisperwind, and the ruler of the country, he did not have the same status as Caesar and was not qualified to be the witness of Emperor Black Dragon's wedding. As for the gods he believed in, forget it. Everyone knew that Emperor Black Dragon and Tiamat were incompatible, and Caesar had never publicly expressed his support for any gods. Under the rule of the empire, although faith was not rejected, it was not supported either. This led to the church organizations that could be seen everywhere in Iradia to be very rare in the north. This was also one of the reasons why the Blackwing Empire was viewed with hostility. Under such circumstances, the only witness that people could think of was Emperor Caesar's biological father or mother. However, in reality, even Caesar himself did not know who his father was. His nominal mother, Nessitoria, had disappeared after being chased out of the north by the Green Dragon. She might even be dead. This question brought about great curiosity and made people look forward to it with anticipation. At that moment, a pair of female eyes abruptly appeared in the skies above Galanaud, surrounded by 7 shining silver stars. The silver divine splendor that descended from the skies drew the attention of the people, and when they looked up into the deep sky, they found that the divine light had already shrouded the land. Goddess Serene's figure was projected in Iradia, stepping on the rippling moonlight as she descended. This god was more ancient than all the gods Caesar had met so far. She was a primordial god at the beginning of the astral plane. In terms of age, she should be of the same generation as the 9-faced dragon god Io. At the beginning of time, she possessed unparalleled power, but because she had always locked her eyes on her sister, Shar, and engaged in a civil war with her mortal enemy for millions of years, this ancient goddess divine power fell again and again. Now, in terms of power and divine authority, she was not even as powerful as Tiamat and Bahamut. Serene's clergy was the moon, tolerance, and protection. She was a neutral and kind god. She had noticed the existence of the Black Dragon a long time ago, even earlier than Tiamat and Bahamut. As the choir of the elven forest sang praises and prayers, Serene set foot on the land of the royal garden, and the appearance of the miracle made the residents of Galanaud exclaim in amazement. The projection of the goddess of the moon slowly came before Caesar and Luna, and people had vaguely guessed that this ancient and beautiful goddess would perhaps be the blesser and witness of this wedding. Gods were not only called gods in Iradia. Their existence was beyond the boundaries of mortal thinking and imagination. These unpredictable beings were the makers and supervisors of the endless worlds. The influence of the gods was far and wide, and their vision spread across the vast starry sky. Perhaps Iradia was just an inconspicuous small continent in their eyes. What this meant was that in the long history of Iradia, no god had revealed their true works because of the natives' wedding. This was a romantic epic that deserved the praise of countless poets and songs of countless singers. From now on, the wedding of the century, promoted by the Blackwing Empire, lived up to its name. The goddess of the moon restrained her divine brilliance, and even her omnipresent divine power was deliberately suppressed. She stopped in front of Caesar. Apart from a plain long dress, there was no ornament on her body, but she was still radiant and dazzling. "Greetings, goddess of the moon." Caesar bowed slightly to show his friendliness. The arrival of the goddess of the moon made the people of the elven forest kneel down. The little one also obediently reached out to pull up her dress, wanting to pay respect to the goddess according to the tradition of the elven forest, but Caesar held her from behind and stopped her. Today, at least for now, Luna was the main character. Even a goddess could not do it. "Hello, Caesar." Serene knew what Black Dragon was doing behind his back, so he smiled and did not mind. After nodding to him, he nodded to Luna. "Hello, Luna." The descent of the goddess of the moon's projection was, of course, not because she favored Caesar or gave him special treatment. No matter how strong the mutated black dragon was, in the end, he was limited to the main material world of Iradia. He could not pose a substantial threat or help to the gods. Of course, her arrival was also not because of the prayers of the elven forest. Although Garcia had the physique and piety to be blessed by the gods, he was, after all, only one of the thousands of devout believers of Serene. He could not influence her decision. The goddess of the moon had other plans. Serene was a neutral and kind god, but as long as he was a god, he would have an irrepressible desire to absorb faith, which was the source of his power. Although the Blackwing Empire did not reject faith, because of the policies of the palace, there were a large number of non-believers and shallow believers here. This was a fortune that even the gods coveted. If she could lead these people to walk on the path of the moon, it would be a huge gain for the goddess of the moon. The Blackwing Empire was vigilant against the gods. Normally, their king would not allow the gods to perform miracles in the empire. This wedding was a rare opportunity, so after receiving the request of the Elven Forest, Serene did not hesitate to agree and arrive as promised. He wanted to spread his influence in the Blackwing Empire and gain more faith. Caesar could guess what the goddess of the moon was thinking, but he had a relatively high tolerance for the neutral gods. It was not that the Blackwing Empire did not have any benefits. The goddess of the moon's public blessing under the eyes of thousands of people would be widely publicized, and there would be various interpretations from people's mouths. This was exactly what Caesar wanted. The situation on the continent was getting more and more tense. The Cold War had begun, and the Blackwing Empire needed to constantly create momentum in order to gain the upper hand in the early stage of the War of Public Opinion. At the same time, this was Luna's small wish. This was the most important thing. The following time entered the familiar process. Under the witness of Serene, Caesar and Luna promised to spend the rest of their lives hand in hand. No matter if they were rich or poor, strong or weak, they would never break the oath. After that, the goddess of the moon gave her sincere blessings with the emblem of the moon and then left Galanoud. The departure of the goddess did not reduce the celebratory atmosphere of Galanoud at all. For the people, the gods were, after all, distant and unattainable. So when the goddess of the moon disappeared, the originally solemn atmosphere quickly changed, and the people burst into even louder cheers. At the end of the wedding process, His Majesty the Emperor and the Queen boarded the open-air carriage together and paraded around Galanoud. Everyone had the opportunity to see the Emperor and the Queen's true appearance up close. The parade around the city lasted for 3 hours, and the destination was set at the central wizard tower of Galanoud. Here, the Emperor and Queen of the Black Dragon stepped out of the open-air carriage and waved to the people again. Logically speaking, the wedding was coming to an end, but who would have thought that after kissing Luna's cheek, Caesar suddenly tore off his disguise and returned to his original form. The 50-meter-tall giant creature appeared again, and its ferocious and sharp scales and claws made people panic. Caesar stretched out his claws, grabbed Luna's body, and flapped his wings with her to fly up the lofty wizard tower. His 4 claws were entrenched on the top of the tower, and his 2 wings, which were like clouds hanging down from the sky, fell from both sides of the tower. The black dragon looked down with his eyes with slits and let out a low roar. Chapter 399. With a low roar from the Black Dragon Emperor, a huge dark cloud suddenly rose from the other side of the sky. The heavy draconic might was the first to arrive, followed by the surging magic energy. When the dark cloud gradually approached, the people could finally see that it was a black mass of radiation dragons. Flames and frost were moving side by side with them, while thunder and storms were coming together with them. The famous radiation dragons, such as Tetra-winged Dragon Tia Bolshk, Judge Rand Krotowak, and Eye of Storm Tulu Sveigler, were among them. In addition, the people saw more radiation dragons that they could not name, but without exception, they were all powerful and terrifying. Before the people could recover from the state of looking up with their necks raised, a faint vibration came from the ground, and war drums sounded in the city. The orc army was walking through the main road of the city with their heads held high. In the center of every square formation, there was an orc riding on a huge Kodo beast captured from the Underdark. They were beating the war drums hard to let the troops move forward with the rhythm. The neat formation, pitch-black armor, and sharp weapons made this army show an unparalleled momentum. Following closely behind was the Goblin Steel Army. Machines roared and smoke billowed as the ground cannons were the first to enter everyone's sight. Steam tanks with huge cannons drove in right after them. Finally, there were armored vehicles with multiple turrets that resembled mobile fortresses. This was probably the most amazing and intimidating army in the Northlands. The Hound Demon Clan, the Grey Horse Clan, the Flying Dragon Clan, the Manticore Clan. This was the first time that most of the citizens of the Blackwing Empire were able to understand how powerful this country was in such a direct manner. This time, a large portion of the humans who came to watch the wedding were merchants, adventurers, bards, and many spies from other countries. They had more or less experienced the confrontation between the other countries in Aladia and the friction between the forces. They had also seen the armies of feudal lords and some kings. However, compared to the torrent that was rolling towards them, they were nothing more than a mob that could not withstand a single blow. Perhaps only the legendary Daybreak army of the Empire on which the sun never sets can compete with them. These outsiders could not help but have this thought in their minds. At this moment, they finally recognized the strong position of the Blackwing Empire in Iradia and compared it with the empire on which the sun never sets. Caesar watched with satisfaction as the originally cheering Galanaud became silent. In this era, Iradia rarely had military activities like military parades because the rulers of various countries were relatively conservative in their thinking and were not willing to publicly show their strength to outsiders. The few military parades that people knew of, most of them were mainly of the nature, and the display of the army on such a scale had basically never appeared. Before this, the Blackwing Empire had never held a military parade, and Caesar knew how strong his army was. At that time, his main policy was to promote the integration of the empire's various races. Under such a background, the Blackwing army could only play a relatively low-key role and could not show too much strength, because the result might be counterproductive and be threatened, intimidated, and suppressed by the people in a sense. But with decades of development and the advancement of the multiracial integration process, the situation was no longer the same. The various races had more or less developed a sense of belonging to the empire and had a certain degree of recognition with each other. The hidden dangers that could be brought about by public inspection of the army were eliminated one by one. Apart from celebrating the wedding, Caesar also needed to use this opportunity to display his military strength to the outside world, to deter Iradia's real and potential opponents, and at the same time to boost the morale of the empire and its vassals, strengthening the confidence and pride of the people in the empire. Caesar's goal was achieved, and the clearly intimidated people made the Black Dragon even happier. Below the towering Mage Tower, the Black-Shirt army composed purely of humans was walking down the road. The march of the Black-Shirt army felt endless, pouring in endlessly from the entrance of Galanaud. Half of them held long and narrow steel blades, while the other half held long-handled repeating muskets, but all of them were wearing heavy, pitch-black armor, revealing only a pair of eyes to stare ahead. The people finally understood why the officials had sealed off the city streets. It was not only for the Black Dragon Emperor and Queen's parade around the city, but also to make space for the swarming army. Now, the Imperial army filled every main road of Galanaud with murderous intent. Even if one looked down from 10,000 meters above the ground, they could still see the black mass of figures. The seemingly endless army finally stopped pouring in, and the people finally got a moment of respite from the oppressive and majestic atmosphere. Immediately, they heard a whine that spread throughout Galanaud. It did not seem like a sound that could be made by living things, and was rather similar to the sound of the steam tanks that passed by before, but louder and more oppressive. The whine sounded again, and the people saw dozens of white plumes of smoke rising into the sky. In the sea between Galanaud's continent, 50 steel warships flying the flag of the Black Wing came into view, and the one in the center, surrounded by frigates, was the overlord of the sea, the breath of the Holy Dragon. It sailed towards Galanaud's port, the wind and waves parting before it, and the sea was also subdued. The breath of the Holy Dragon, which was more than 100 meters long, was one of the 3 main warships of the North. The grasp of the Empire was sent on a long-distance mission, while the Dawn of the North was responsible for monitoring the territorial waters of the North. Only the breath of the Holy Dragon received the honor of being selected by Emperor Black Dragon to participate in this military parade. Boom! The breath of the Holy Dragon opened fire, and its target was the uninhabited region of the distant sea. Amidst the deafening boom, its main cannon that could allow a person to stand and run burst into blazing flames. Thousands of pounds of super-heavy armor-piercing shells exploded on the surface of the sea, stirring up huge whirlpools and waves. The breath of the Holy Dragon's main cannon seemed to be a command. When it gave the order, all of Galanaud's cannons opened fire at the sky at the same time. But today, they were not loaded with lethal gunpowder. Instead, they were filled with dazzling fireworks. The beautiful fireworks covered the entire sky above the city, reflecting the huge reflection of Emperor Black Dragon. Long live the Empire! The army of radiation dragons let out the first roar in unison, followed by the army of orcs, then the army of goblins, the army of hounds. Like a relay, they spread the roar to every corner of Galanaud, and in the end, even the people were infected. The entire city was filled with loud shouts. Long live the Empire! Long live Emperor Black Dragon! Long live Queen Luna! Ah, my child, are you not even going to invite your mother to such an occasion? Your rebellion and rudeness have truly broken my heart. A melancholic and evil voice rang out. It was not loud, but not only was it not drowned out by the hubbub, it was even clearer against the background of the clamor, reaching everyone's ears. Galanaud welcomed the arrival of 2 gods in a single day. Chapter 400. The fierce sunlight suddenly turned gloomy. Unlike the divine arrival of moon god Serene, when the whispers ended, a silent fear shrouded the surroundings. Gloom and mystery flowed out from every corner. Except for slightly stronger monsters like the clan leaders, most of the people of Galanaud felt as if their throats were grabbed by a pair of invisible hands. Divine might and draconic aura worked together, and Tiamat's mountainous body occupied the sky. The red dragon's head was in the center, and the other 4 dragon heads were on the left and right. The evil dragon mother's form had changed, and the red dragon's head that she originally occupied the dominant position was even larger and more prominent. The dragon's eyes were like an abyss that absorbed light. In other words, although no one knew what method she used, she had become stronger than before. There was no doubt about that. If you just want to show off your existence, then you have succeeded. You can leave now. Caesar ignored the evil dragon mother's dazzling appearance and shook his wings as if nothing happened. Of course, if you are here to give me your blessings, I welcome you. Blessings? Roar. Tiamat laughed. But in her true form, her laughter was more like a dragon's roar and thunder. A madman who does not respect his ancestors, a traitor who bared his fangs at his own mother, still wants to receive blessings? Meaningless words. Caesar shook his head. Do you feel that you have become stronger and want to fight again? I advise you not to humiliate yourself, especially in front of so many people. You are right, Caesar. The Dragon Queen actually admitted it openly. You are growing faster than I thought. You can actually make that idiot Aslier's given in front of you. Even if I have devoured part of Quelquizad's divinity, I am indeed no match for you with this plain projection alone. Then, her expression suddenly changed and became vicious. But what about your servants and slaves? The shuddering divine might and draconic aura descended at the same time, creating a substantial suppression on all creatures below legendary. This suppression was equivalent to an indiscriminate attack, and, after accumulating to a certain extent, it could be fatal. Descending at such a time, are you planning to use this to threaten me? Tiamat, you are in a terrible state now. Caesar seemed to shake his head in disappointment. He did not need to move, and his psionic energy alone was enough to offset Tiamat's influence on the city. One more thing, they are not servants or slaves, but citizens of the Blackwing Empire. All of them. Caesar had said this to Blakesia before, and pointed it in the royal court, and also in public more than once. It was to establish a sense of belonging to the empire and promote the process of the multiracial integration, subtly but effectively. Hearing this, Tiamat laughed maniacally as if she had gotten her way. She suddenly drew closer to Caesar and stared at him as if she had heard the greatest joke in the world. That's too funny. My people, you are? The Dragon Queen's tone made Caesar feel uncomfortable. He had a bad feeling. Before the Black Dragon could speak, Tiamat's voice was heard. She shifted her gaze away from Caesar and turned to the group of radiation dragons. You call them your people? But I hope you don't tell them that it was you. You made them stay away from their parents by stealing, plundering, and exchanging. You used them as tools and weapons, forcibly distorting their inheritance and changing their nature before they were born, turning them into incomplete creatures with only 200 to 300 years of lifespan, and forcing them to be loyal to you. As she spoke, fragments of images appeared in the sky beside the 5 draconries, showing the various details of the dragon nest plan. They call you father? Tiamat sneered. But this father of yours is even more cruel than the evil dragon ancestor. The dragons were restless, letting out low growls filled with hostility toward Tiamat. The truth revealed by the evil dragon mother did not affect them. From the moment they were born, these dragons were no longer Penishade dragons. They were another kind of creature under the influence of radiation. Other than unreserved loyalty, they had no respect for the original deity, the 5 draconries. Tiamat seemed to have expected the reaction of the dragons. Other than a sneer, she did not show any other emotion. You call them citizens? But you must not tell them what happens to those who disobey you. She shifted her gaze again and focused on the humans. Let me tell you, as long as you disobey, you will suddenly disappear one day. You will be locked up in a cage and handed over to the boars for human experiments. Even if you die in pain after experiencing countless torments, the Empire will turn your body into an undead spirit, enslaved forever, never to rise again. Some bloody and terrifying images replaced the previous fragments of images. In the images, the wild boars were working with their hands covered in blood, and the undead were dragging corpses into the incubation pool. Oh, I almost forgot. Just as everyone was shocked into silence, Tiamat shook her head, choking with laughter. Wasn't it like this from the beginning? The human race is really forgetful. It seems that the humans of this generation have already forgotten how you came here. As she spoke, a new scene was created around the previous images. Blackwing's nest attacking the northern countries, taking down the Boulder Fortress, massacring the city, attacking the Lakern Kingdom, bathing in blood. In the same year, more than 100,000 people in the northern countries died in the war, and the Blackwing Empire was born from the corpses of the northern countries. Looking at Galanoud, who was almost speechless, Tiamat was very satisfied. She was silent for a moment, her gaze sweeping across the people below. Suddenly, she saw the wary faces of the elves and became interested. You're reliable elven allies. Let us guess how you two became allies. Tiamat stared at the elves and said, You relied on your relationship with the forest fairies to capture their ruler, then used the elven forest to threaten and brainwash her, and finally sent her back to the elven forest as if nothing had happened. This time, even I, as a mother, can't help but applaud you. Tiamat laughed out loud. The image of Garcia being imprisoned, bewitched, and kneeling before the black dragon appeared in the sky, followed by the truth of the elven forest attack, as well as the scene of the elven king actively helping to cover up the truth. You keep saying that they are your people, but you lie on the ground of this country, drinking its marrow and blood. In order to gain loyalty, you allow those who obey you to become nobles. In order to expand the army, you let farmers and craftsmen go bankrupt and join the army. In order to achieve your so-called industrialization, You have to raise taxes again and again. The dragon's treasury is filled with mountains of gold coins, and workers and farmers fill the cemetery. Tiamat bared her fangs, sharp swords blooming from her words. Those who disobey, you let them be destroyed. Those who are strong, you reduce them to slaves. Those who are kind, you instigate them to bleed. Those who try to escape, you make them have nowhere to run. My dear child, I am truly proud of you, but I wonder if your people and allies will still be as they were before. Chapter 4:01. In Iradia, Tiamat no longer had any direct means to deal with Caesar, but weakening the enemy was another way to strengthen oneself. The Dragon Queen could not sit by and watch her enemy grow stronger, so she would do everything she could to make Caesar's life uncomfortable. And she did it. Tiamat also knew very well that with just these few words, she would not be able to immediately start a rebellion in the Blackwing Empire. But when she peeled away the country's beautiful and prosperous exterior, the contradictions would appear on paper. The seeds of doubt had been planted and would soon take root and grow strong. After accomplishing her goal, Tiamat did not leave immediately. She observed Caesar's every move, wanting to see how the Black Dragon would explain and salvage everything. She really wanted to see Caesar panicking and being flustered. She did not expect that the Black Dragon's first reaction after hearing everything would be, "I have never used you, never." Caesar turned his head, and Luna on his back said, "I promise." The little one nodded. After hiding her body under the Black Dragon's scales, this was the first time she faced an evil god. Tiamat's image had clearly traumatized her, and her expression was timid. "I know." The Black Dragon's face showed an expression of relief, and only then did he raise his head to face Tiamat. "I do not intend to deny what you said." Everyone was waiting for the Black Dragon Emperor's explanation, but they didn't expect Caesar to admit it openly. "But as a ruler, I can't seem to find any other way to make this country stronger quickly." Caesar didn't even try to hide it. Tiamat smiled in satisfaction. In her opinion, this was a sign that the Black Dragon had been forced into a desperate situation. Since this fellow had admitted defeat, this descent was not in vain, and she had obtained the greatest results. The Dragon Queen's silhouette gradually faded, preparing to leave this place. "No, it's lying." The sudden voice was magnified by the dense ripples of spiritual energy in the air. It was particularly ear-splitting in the silence of Galanout and spread across the entire city. Everyone's gaze turned towards the source of the sound, and even the blurred shadow of the Dragon Queen solidified again. Tiamat's 10 dragon eyes looked down with great pressure, intending to see who dared to defy the god. Surprisingly, the speaker was not one of the upper echelons of the royal court, nor was he a member of the Blackwing army. He was one of the onlookers on both sides of the road, and from his attire, he did not look like a fanatical supporter of the empire, a foreign merchant. Realizing that everyone's gazes were focused on him, and that the godly aura was faintly showing signs of penetrating through the psionic energy, the vendor was a little nervous, but he still did not change his previous words. The 5-headed Dragon Queen is lying." After those words left his mouth, he seemed to have gained some sort of courage from going all out. Taking a deep breath, his voice became smooth. "I don't know about the rest, but what it said about the slightest disobedience would suddenly vanish, locked in a cage for human experiments, and turned into an undead, is a lie." As he spoke, the vendor's face turned red. "I came to the Northern Empire 2 years ago. At first, I was instigated by some people due to my ignorance, and joined an organization called Renaissance, responsible for spreading rumors about the Black Dragon Emperor, attempting to create chaos. Later, the organization was destroyed, and all members were locked in a dungeon. But I'm still alive now. Not just me, but many others are still alive." His voice slowly became louder. "Apart from the leader of the Renaissance and the die-hard members, people like me who were bewitched and coerced were only locked up for half a year before being released." His words triggered thought and resonance. Many people began to whisper, and after a short interval, someone from other places in Galanout added, Perhaps being locked in a dungeon was a disgrace, but I did violate the laws of this country, and I admit it. And I learned one thing from there. The Borman guards would only take away those unforgivable death row criminals, and not every civilian who slightly disobeyed. Those words caused a small commotion. At this moment, Hogg stepped forward to speak. He raised his head and looked directly at Tiamat. You say that we have massacred the 5 northern countries. However, before His Majesty took over the northern lands, the northern countries had countless internal wars of various sizes. Only in the face of a strong enemy would they be barely able to unite. This situation had been maintained intermittently for 600 years. However, the Blackwing Empire that you speak of was born from a corpse, had brought unity, stability, and peace. Lady Tiamat. Just as Hogg's voice trailed off, Elven Queen Kasia also spoke. Her expression was not good, and the images Tiamat presented were tantamount to exposing her scars. Even Her Majesty the Moon Goddess did not think that I was corrupted, brainwashed, and controlled. I saw that incident as a trial, and it made me more aware of what I should do. The Blackwing Empire and the Elven Woods are allies, and whether it is deception or seduction, war or time, the alliance will not fade. Kasia's reaction was more intense, because these images were not only targeted at Caesar and the Blackwing Empire. If they were spread to the Elven Woods, it would also shake her rule fundamentally, causing her people to doubt her motives and goals. Therefore, Kasia had to stand up more firmly to refute and use the Moon Goddess to increase her credibility. From the moment Tiamat's voice ended, the Empire's Public Opinion Control Department reacted with unimaginable speed. Now, the head of the department, Barrett, finally got what he wanted. Thankful that he was not late, the panting Barrett heaved a sigh of relief. Imitating the Dragon Queen, he used the image crystal to release some images that had not been made public, and shouted at the same time. It said that the dragon's treasury was filled with gold coins, but it did not mention that in order to subsidize the Empire's expenses, His Majesty's treasury had once been emptied. It said that the Empire had continuously raised taxes for industrialization, but the factories that had sprouted up from the ground provided a large number of job opportunities and also made those expensive products more approachable. It said that His Majesty was unscrupulous in order to expand the army, but whether the Empire was facing war or peace depended on the number of troops, and only military force could protect the lives, wealth, and dignity of the people in the country. The weak would be beaten. This was a truth that everyone knew. It said that as long as one was loyal, one could become a noble, but even a noble could not escape the law. Tiamat's eyes gradually narrowed. She had miscalculated. She should have left immediately after planting the seed of suspicion and should not have stayed to wait for the other party to retaliate. Now, the situation had begun to develop in a direction that was out of her control. Enough! The Dragon Queen that was coiled up in the sky roared, and the long-winded voice made her feel annoyed. You ignorant mortals, ignorant fools, how would you know? Despicable evil dragon mother, relying on one-sided and narrow-minded words to incite and bewitch people, you should be the one who has had enough. Suddenly, a loud shout came from the crowd, forcefully interrupting her voice. Tiamat furiously searched for the figure, but psionic energy had blinded her senses. Evil dragon mother, you are not welcome here. Take your ugly dragon head and leave. Roar! The 5-headed dragon queen revealed her evil and ruthless side. Her 5 heads roared in the sky, and her divine power converged to form a terrifying image. You damned dregs! How dare you humiliate and disobey the gods? Everyone here must die. The vortex of divine power caused the crowd to fall into silence, but it was only for a moment, and immediately more voices sounded, and some people even began to throw stones at the projection in the sky. We are not afraid of you, ugly god. Get out of Galanow. Tiamat, get out of the Blackwing Empire. Chapter 402. Insisting that the Emperor was absolutely right and ensuring the supremacy of the Empire. This was the first operating principle of the Public Opinion Risk Control Department. This set of principles had been engraved in the minds of every servant as early as the establishment of the department. And with the continuous development of the public opinion control department, a series of response systems in the face of unexpected situations have been derived from these principles. In fact, from the people who spoke at the beginning to the people who threw the stones at the end, they were all servants of the public opinion control department distributed among the crowd, or, as the saying goes, shills. What they were doing now was actually the same as what Tiamat had done just now, but when it came to the control of people's hearts, they were even better than the evil dragon mother who had the divine title of conspiracy. Because they were humans, they understood people's hearts better. When Tiamat's projection appeared in the sky above Galanaud, provoking and mocking both sides at the same time, no matter if it was a normal person or a slightly capable adventurer, no one dared to show up at the first moment. This was the norm. Although the Blackwing Empire had many non-believers and shallow believers, the majesty and power of the gods were still deeply rooted in people's hearts, and the deep-rooted reverence and fear buried in the minds of many races could not be erased. If they were asked to line up and face the gods alone, no one would say a word, let alone be disrespectful and disobedient. But it was important to note that most intelligent creatures, especially humans, would have an extremely strong follower effect under certain circumstances, and there was another species that was highly similar to humans in this aspect: sheep. Under normal circumstances, most sheep were docile and cowardly, and a flock of sheep was a simple and scattered organization. Usually, when they gathered together, they would just wander left and right cluelessly, but when one sheep took the lead, the other sheep would rush forward without hesitation, completely ignoring the possibility of jackals, wolves, or other dangers in front of them. This analogy was best used to describe the current crowd. After the servants of the public opinion department of the Blackwing Empire who pretended to be civilians came out one after another, the herd effect gradually made the situation develop in an uncontrollable direction. When the will of the herd descended, people's brains would enter a different mode, and their emotions would involuntarily become agitated. Countless people hid in the boiling crowd and loudly threatened and cursed, disrespecting the Dragon Queen, Tiamat, who they usually worshipped. The taboo experience brought about by this impulse would feed back more stimulation and satisfaction to the brain, making them even crazier. A frightening fanaticism spread among the crowd. Hit it. Iradia does not welcome you. Tiamat, get out of this world. Fight me if you dare. The black dragon could not help but raise his eyebrows at the violent reaction of the people of Galanaud. This was something that Caesar had not expected. In fact, the reason why they dared to do so was not because of Caesar. Although this fellow was undoubtedly powerful, the high and mighty Emperor Black Dragon was far from ordinary people. They were not Luna, so the safety they could obtain from Caesar was very little. The people's confidence and sense of security came from the imperial army around them. Because of the military parade, the soldiers of the Blackwing Legion filled every corner of Galanaud's streets and alleys. The fully armed and powerful army gave the people an unparalleled sense of self-confidence. It inevitably made them feel certain that if Tiamat really attacked, the army around them would protect them. Tiamat had chosen the perfect time to descend. Her goal was simple, and that was to drag Caesar down when his momentum was at its peak. The Dragon Queen had succeeded, but she did not leave immediately, as she was eager to see Caesar's defeated face. The Blackwing Empire's response was perfect. Not only was her instigation and bewitchment overturned, she had also pushed herself into an extremely awkward position. The only thing that could save the situation now was blood. Tiamat was very clear that as long as she casually hanged a person from the noisy crowd, even if it was only one person, it would make these cowardly and incompetent scum realize what they were doing. They would immediately shut their mouths and turn back into cowardly lambs waiting to be slaughtered. But at the same time, she also knew that the Black Dragon would never allow her to do so. Caesar Orderonzo Tangerine. This mutated dragon was not invincible in the prime material plane of Iradia, but he was not far from the strongest. As long as this guy did not go crazy and touch the taboo, There was hardly anything in this world that could kill or destroy him. Even as the ancestor of all the Pinochet dragons, she could not do much against the mutated black dragon. Tiamat, it seems that you are enjoying this self-humiliating situation. Are you still not planning to leave? Caesar looked up and said. He had not made a move. Strength was not the main factor in this confrontation, but he had still won. Damn it. Tiamat's blue dragon head was vexed. Her green dragon head was filled with viciousness, and the rest were filled with anger. She growled and retracted her projection. One day, you will pay the price. It won't be long. In the end, she did not fight with Caesar. It was meaningless to fight with just a projection, and it was impossible for the cautious dragon queen to descend in person. She could only think of other ways. Caesar was well aware of this, which was why he had the confidence to confront the dragon mother. However, there was one thing that he was wrong about. He believed that the reason why the gods would not personally descend to the lower realm was because crossing the realm barrier would cause a lot of losses. This was indeed true, but it was too one-sided. As for the real reason why it was difficult for the gods to personally descend to the prime material plane, we can quote the description of a certain mad scholar in Eladia. The creatures in Iradia are like in a balloon. Most of them are as weak as ants. Although the gods and abominations are incomparably powerful, they can only stay outside the balloon. The inside and outside of the balloon are separated by an insurmountable boundary wall. If the gods want to exert influence on this world, they will generally choose to use the creatures in the balloon to attack another group of creatures. Even if they really want to do something, they can't puncture the balloon. They can only pinch it with their hands. The so-called divine punishment and projections that we see are the outlines that they squeeze out with their hands through the balloon. The noble gods will not appear in Eladia, because if they want to descend, not only do they need to spend an endless amount of energy to cross the world barrier, they also need to lower themselves to become a life that this world can understand and bear, what they call ants. This means that if you're not afraid of other ants and are strong enough to ignore the threat of those silhouettes, even if you point at their noses and scold them, insult their divine blessings and destroy their churches, it will be fine. This was the real reason why Tiamat had never taken the risk to descend in person to kill Caesar, even though she regarded him as a treacherous thorn in her heart and repeatedly failed in her plans. This was because the black dragon had basically reached the top level of power that this material world could display. If she really chose to lower herself to descend, under the suppression of the world and the situation where she could not acclimatize, it was very likely that she would not be able to defeat him. Long live the emperor! Long live the empire! Long live the Northern Empire! Seeing Tiamat leave with a strong start but weak finish, a huge burst of cheers broke out in the crowd. Making a god suffer was a major event that had never happened in the Third Era. Obviously, it had greatly increased the people's self-confidence and sense of belonging. Caesar also sighed softly. He was not afraid of Tiamat, but if the crisis caused by her provocation was not dealt with properly, it might cause some indelible damage to the Blackwing Empire. Even in such a situation now, the Empire would need some time to digest the negative impact caused by it in the future. Finally, after many twists and turns, this wedding of the century finally ended in a more satisfactory manner, but the far-reaching impact it had on the Empire had just begun, positive and negative. Chapter 4:03. Woo! Woo! The rainforest at night was covered with a layer of haze. It was the howl of a beast that resembled a wolf or a fox. The blood-stained leaves danced in the wind, and the mournful howls rose and fell in the forest. Athos leaned against a tree trunk, holding his halberd and looking around vigilantly. He was like a warrior in a desperate situation. His determined face was covered with sweat due to the long period of exhaustion, and the wound on his back was throbbing. Foxes, foxes. He had never thought that there would be so many foxes and wolves in the north, and they were so strong. These foxes and wolves had obvious social characteristics. They were organized, had plans, and had tactics. What was even more exaggerated was that they knew how to use tools and weapons. These were not the beasts he had seen in the swamp at all, but a new and terrifying humanoid species. More than once, Athos had seen these foxes and wolves holding long blades, steel ropes, and bows. They used traps and their advantage in numbers to hunt his tribesmen like prey. Disperse, attack, hunt for their heads. The faintly discernible figures and the rising and falling howls made Adas realize that the attack was not over yet. Another wave of enemy reinforcements had arrived. It's been 2 days. Artist Xiongxin took a deep breath. Perhaps it was because of food, greed, or simply the desire to kill. But since the moment the two sides met, the foxes and wolves had launched an endless attack on the dwarves of Grey Castle. Their energy seemed endless, and their numbers were almost inexhaustible. Up until now, the dwarves had not closed their eyes for even a moment. They had not even eaten or drunk a mouthful of water. No matter how strong the dwarves' bodies were, they could not bear this level of exhaustion. Not to mention that the dwarves of Grey Castle were not good at fighting. As time went on, Adas went from being at ease at the beginning to slightly strained, and now he was exhausted. The ambitious clan that had been greatly weakened after the Battle of the Three Fortresses found it difficult to face such a large-scale attack. Without supplies, positions, and support, they could not engage in a protracted battle with any army. The dwarves of Grey Castle were forced to retreat continuously, shrinking their defensive circle time and time again, and finally forced into the depths of the forest. The legendary halberd trembled slightly. His sore muscles and exhausted spirit constantly challenged the will of the dwarf prince. In the end, Adas stuck out his tongue to wet his dry lips. He picked up his halberd and walked forward. The heads of the fox and wolf soldiers who had charged into the forest flew into the air. Warm blood splattered on their faces. Right next to him, the exhausted dwarf warrior was pushed to the ground by the foxes and wolves. The sound of flesh being torn apart and his painful cries for help completed the symphony. Athos wanted to rescue him, but his body didn't listen to him and staggered. It was because of this slight difference that when he killed Fox and Wolf, he found that the dwarf guard's neck had been bitten off. Blood was gushing out from his throat, and his body was twitching as he made huff sounds. It was obvious that he wouldn't survive. Retreat, retreat. If they wanted to reduce their losses, they had to shrink their defensive circle as much as possible. But at the same time, the enemy's encirclement was also shrinking, and the situation was getting more and more dangerous. The only chance of survival was to break out of the encirclement. But it wasn't that Athos didn't try. As soon as he realized the possible danger, Prince Ambition, who still had the strength to spare, tried to break out of the encirclement with his people. But the foxes and wolves were faster and more sensitive. They used a very efficient howl to convey the message, and then all of them moved together with the dwarves of Grey Castle. In the war of attrition that had lasted for 2.5 days, the battlefield had shifted 5 times. In other words, the dwarves of Grey Castle had tried to break out of the encirclement 5 times, but without exception, they all failed. Without large-scale destructive spells, they couldn't deal with an attack of this scale at all. Even the legendary halberd could only play a limited role in a war. It couldn't be the key to victory or defeat. At this time, Athos couldn't help but miss Prince Marin. Not to mention the fact that the entire Thunderroar clan was present. Even if the Red Castle only sent a small group of spellcasters to help, they wouldn't have fallen into such a situation. Is it too much? Flickering fireflies in the dark night, Corona-burned Mane squatted on a tree and stared at the dense forest burning with blood and fire in the distance. The dwarves who keep retreating are not what we want. I'm afraid they'll lose the courage to break out of the encirclement. We're just teaching them the rules of the northern region first. Not far from him, Herno Bloodtooth said. He stepped on the tree trunk with his 4 feet, which was completely different from his companions. He looked more like a beast. It's not that we didn't give these dwarves a chance, it's just that they're too weak. Only that weapon is slightly interesting. Like most humanoid races, the Foxwolfmen in the northern region would use their clan name as their surname, and the clan leader would add a nu at the end of his name as a symbol. It was obvious that the Council of the Kingdom of Wolfheart was very concerned about the First Order of the Northern Empire. The leaders of 2 clans were present in person. I don't understand. Why would that person be interested in these dwarves? I don't see anything better than the Foxwolfmen. That person should pay more attention to our request, Hernu added angrily. They're not dwarves, they're dwarves. Haven't you seen dwarves before? Karana Burned Main corrected him seriously. Maybe that person's subordinates are interested in them. After all, this order was given by that annoying gnoll. You mean Hog? I've seen him a long time ago. Many years ago, he brought a bunch of pus-ridden weaklings and said that he wanted to join the Bloodtooth clan, but I didn't agree. The guy was very big. I remember him. You can make it up however you want. Karanu's beard trembled as he glanced elsewhere. At this moment, he saw a burst of light that was not too blazing in the depths of the forest. He quickly said, "These dwarves have finally decided to try again. Make way for them. Call your people back. Don't let them lose more, or it'll be hard to explain." After that, the other leader immediately let out a howl. The ears of the Foxwolfmen who were fighting on the battlefield twitched. Some of them quietly left the battlefield and disappeared into the dark forest. "Follow me." Prince Adaz held his halberd and risked everything to launch a charge. Just now, the dwarf saw a possible gap in the battle, and he knew that this was the last chance for the ambitious clan, so he immediately decided to break out for the 6th time. If they still could not find a way out this time, then he was willing to lead the charge and die. He and his tribesmen moved forward quickly in the darkness, their ears filled with the howls of foxes and wolves. Athos was originally a valiant dwarf prince, but now he looked like a desperate refugee. Arrows and sharp blades left indelible marks on his face and body. His armor was full of scars, and his hair was dyed red with blood. Even his right arm that held the halberd had a large piece of flesh cut off by a foxwolf ambusher. But even so, Adaz still managed to accomplish an impossible feat. He led the dwarves of Grey Castle to break out of the encirclement and return to the territory of the Northern Empire's Forsyths. When the outline of the towering fortress appeared in the rising sun and gradually expanded, the pursuit of the foxes and wolves became more and more fierce. But in the end, they suddenly gave up their pursuit and stopped at a short hill some distance away from the fortress. They stared at the dwarves with hostile and vicious eyes that were already struggling at death's door. It seemed that these Foxwolfmen knew what this fort meant. They were afraid of this place. Adaz thought, after realizing that the Foxwolfmen did not pursue, the dwarf prince adjusted his body and slowed down. He stopped and turned his head. Leaning on his halberd, he said to his clansmen, "Ask for help from the Northern Empire. We agree to join." Before he could finish, he fainted because his body could not bear the burden and his mind suddenly relaxed. Chapter 404. The Empire's Grasp fleet wasn't the first fleet to discover a new continent, and Kinder wasn't the first outsider to land on Villister. However, this exploration was so unusual that it would have a huge impact on the Blackwing Empire and Villister in the future. And all of this had to be explained by the crew of this fleet. For this voyage, the Northern Empire had made ample preparations. Of the 5,000 crew members of the Empire's Grasp fleet, half of them weren't sailors or soldiers. The composition of this group was complicated. There were hired craftsmen, farmers, and merchants, as well as scholars, spellcasters, and members of the Blackwing clan. They had gone through the harsh tests of the Empire. Every one of them had a mission to explore and record all information about Villister. According to the Eladians, Vilost, which was located on the other side of the world, was filled with great danger. The ferocious natives, cruel beasts, and curses were everywhere. All of these made one flinch. More importantly, Eladian's trump card, magic, would be greatly weakened and suppressed on this continent. For this reason, Eladian called this continent the Forsaken Land of the Gods. Caesar used the information provided by Kinder to make a simple deduction of the situation on Villister. The weakening of magic was probably due to the density and activity of elements on this continent being incomparable to that of Iradia. Based on this point alone, it wasn't wrong to call Vilister the forsaken land of the gods. As for the curses everywhere, Caesar guessed that the Iradia might be uncomfortable with the new continent's environment and be more prone to diseases that were misinterpreted as curses. However, this didn't stop the Northern Empire's progress. The Empire's voyage ships could enter the dead magic zone normally, and the Blackwing clan's army didn't fear any creatures on Vilister. Apart from the Dragon's Nest project, the Blackwing Empire also had another project that was secretly being carried out at the same time: basic medicine. There was a problem that had always troubled Caesar. Iradia didn't have any medical knowledge. When he was young, he was told about this when he was in the Orc Stone Crow clan. But at that time, the little black dragon's attention was all focused on the summer grass, so he didn't think too much about it. Now that he thought about it, he realized that there were many doubts about this issue. It was understandable that the primitive Stone Crow clan didn't have the concept of disease. It was understandable that the Elven Forest didn't have the concept of disease. In fact, it was understandable that the Northlands countries didn't have the concept of disease due to their backwardness. However, why was it that the developed trading cities and powerful empires didn't realize this problem as well? In order to clear up the confusion, under the instructions of Emperor Black Dragon, some people conducted research on ancient ruins and hidden epics. The results showed that as early as the end of the First Era, when the orcs were on the rise, there was already a profession called witch doctor. But in the end, this profession, which might have been a medical profession, was buried in the dust of history with the collapse of the Orc Empire. The humans who rose to prominence later didn't seem to have explored this aspect at all. In the process of awakening, humans should be filled with curiosity and doubt. This wasn't a normal development, but a result of interference. Countless priests of the gods walked all over Iradia. The gods loved the people and used holy light, baptism, and healing divine spells to save the dying and heal the injured. The mortals responded with devout faith. So what was wrong with that? Medicine was a taboo area that no one in Iradia was allowed to touch. If one were to tear down this layer of disguise, it would mean becoming an enemy of all the gods who devoured faith. Be in the past, present, or future, Caesar wouldn't do such a thing. So, he couldn't announce this truth to the outside world and could only conduct research in secret within his own territory. Among the crew of the Northern Fleet, there were medical pioneers disguised as scholars who were in charge of recording the diseases that might exist in Vilister. Captain Krender was very careful. In the process of discovery, to ensure the safety of the crew, he ordered them not to act alone. He divided them into groups of 20 to help each other. But even so, 6 of the groups still lost contact. They sent people to wait and search for 2 months, but still didn't find any valuable information. As the winter grew warmer, Krender realized that he had to set off. The fleet stayed in Vilister for an entire winter. After a final large-scale search, everyone was ordered to return to the temporary base, board the wooden boats, and return to the safety of the fleet. The order to return was immediately given. Krender went into the captain's cabin and began to look through and organize the information submitted by the various groups. This was his most important gift to the Black Dragon. He stroked his chest-length beard that hadn't been trimmed for a long time and muttered as he read, "There's enough information to write a book. There's enough information to write a book." Enrico put the information collected by the intelligence organization back on the table. He spent a day to finish reading all the documents. The information was detailed enough, from the development of the Blackwing Empire to the structure of the society, the size of the army, the ideology, and even some confidential information. Enrico was right. The information could be turned into an encyclopedia of the Blackwing Empire with just a little bit of organization. Now, a trade barrier with the unfalling empire as the core had gradually formed. In this competition for the trade system, the unfalling empire had obtained an unstoppable absolute advantage. But the North was not as weak as imagined. Not only did the newly born hybrid country not bow to the unfallen empire, but it also took a different approach and re-established its own trade network. Although this new trade network was small and fragile and would not be of any help in a short period of time, the Blackwing Empire would still have to bear a large amount of losses. However, the will behind this decision was very firm. The Blackwing Empire would rather suffer losses and rebuild the trade network than bow down and join the continental trade system and acknowledge the core dominance of the empire. After hearing the news, Enriel fell into deep thought. He never underestimated the monarchs of any country in Aladia. From what he knew, anyone who could become a king was no ordinary person. Even if the monarch of a country was muddle-headed and incompetent to a certain extent, he would still have a wise prime minister and vassals under him. He already knew that the ruler of the Northern Empire was a dragon, and a dragon that could build a country was definitely different from those arrogant dragons. Enrico didn't think that the Black Dragon monarch would fail to see the situation clearly and go against the unfalling empire when it was at an absolute disadvantage. There was only one reason. It had enough confidence. Caesar Ordoronzo Tangerine, the winner of the War of the Three Gods, the founder of the hybrid empire, and the king of the northern world. Enrico recognized his strength and wisdom from the bottom of his heart and valued him highly. He wanted to know where his opponent's confidence came from, and to defeat an enemy, he needed to know more about his opponent. That was why the ruler spent a day reading the intelligence reports. The scorching sun outside the window was setting in the west, and the golden light shone through the huge floor-to-ceiling window and sprinkled on the surface of the desk. Emperor Enrico exhaled and rubbed his temples with his hands before opening his eyes. It did really well. I don't think even I could turn a country into what it is now in 100 years. It's a dragon. It has a natural advantage in absorbing power and claws, said the prime minister sitting opposite him with a straight face. It has nothing to do with race. Enrico shook his head and said, almost everything it did was correct and full of pioneering significance. Even some of its gadgets are very interesting. And now, the industry that is going on in that country. Industry. He didn't remember the unfamiliar word in the intelligence reports. Industrial revolution, added the prime minister. Industrial revolution. Enrico said with certainty, if all the projects listed above are successful, it will definitely change the workshops and smiths in the north. Although I can't predict what it will become in the end, it will only become stronger. We need to stop, how? Start a war? Enrico interrupted him. Now is not the time to start a war. Let the Dawn army block the new dimensional rift first. I don't want to see the creatures of the lower world appear in this world. Then what should we do? Asked the prime minister. We also have a revolution. Enrico looked at him. To be honest, I'm very interested in that steam furnace. Let's keep up with the times, old friend. Otherwise, we'll be surpassed by a newborn. Chapter 405. Caesar leisurely flew over his territory at a speed of 120 kilometers per hour and an altitude of about 1,000 meters. The Northern Empire had a large area of strategic depth, so although he was still within the borders of the empire, below him was the uninhabited wilderness, the great desert of Tahala. Ever since the apostle of the Black Blood God died here, climate change has made environmental modification possible. I remember that this place was still a sandy desert at that time. Under the Black Dragon's huge metallic wings, there was a thin layer of soil covered with black mud. It looked exactly the same as the edge of the Black Rock Mountain in Therengobi. However, the land here had been excavated according to the uneven terrain, and there was some turbid water in it. If one were to observe carefully with the dragon's vision, they could see some orc laborers using horsegate lizards and kodo beasts as transportation. The environmental modification plan was an important part of the empire's strategy. After all, barren and desolate land had no value, but grasslands and forests were different. Caesar lifted his head slightly. Above him was a thick layer of clouds. Sunlight shone through the gaps in the clouds and formed pillars of light. He felt the moisture in the air and smelled the moist air. The precipitation in this place was much higher than before. The Tahala Desert had a little bit of green. The most vigorous weeds were the first to appear. They grew wildly on the soil that was rich in minerals and some moisture. Sparse saplings were also quietly showing their heads. In time, this place would become a fertile grassland. If the Black Dragon was willing to invite the tree shepherds of the elven forest to operate it, perhaps in a few years, this place would even become a new forest. After spending a long time swimming in the Tahala Desert, Caesar finally retracted his gaze. The temperature of his body began to change, and, at the same time, the temperature of his body began to rise. The rainwater around him evaporated into a large amount of white fog. After reaching a high altitude where no one could see, the Black Dragon began to accelerate. This 50-meter-long big guy could easily break through the sound barrier. Even if he did not rely on teleportation, it would only take about a day to travel from the north to the Empire on the other side at full speed. However, Caesar rarely appeared in the outside world. He had never even stepped out of his own territory. But it was different this time. The Black Dragon left the Empire without hesitation, passing through the sky above the Sign Fortress. According to the reliable information provided by the shape-shifting monsters scattered all over the place, the branches of Ukrahir had recently reappeared in the kingdom of Ibu, northwest of Iradia. The name Ukrahir was translated as World Tree in the ancient languages represented by the Draconic and Elvish languages. Branches of Ukrahir was actually branches of the World Tree. This thing could be regarded as a tool, a material, or even a weapon. The specific definition of it was debated by the scholars of Eladia, but one thing was basically certain. It was definitely more precious than a legendary treasure. It was rumored that the scepter of the god of nature, Sylvanus, was carved out of the branches of Ukrahir. It was an item favored by the gods, and its preciousness was beyond doubt. However, this item was not very attractive to Caesar. Although the Black Dragon was also greedy, Caesar rarely deliberately collected things like magical weapons and props. This guy was a pragmatist through and through, and these things were of little use to a dragon. They could only be displayed in exquisite cabinets for display. Branches of Ukrahir was for the elven forest. Recently, Kasia Whisperwind was very troubled. Back then, Tiamat's words in Galanoud had not only negatively affected the Blackwing Empire, but also planted seeds of doubt and uneasiness in the elven forest. At that time, she refuted Tiamat in the name of being blessed and recognized by the moon god. But in reality, not all the people in the elven forest were believers of the moon god. On the contrary, in this kind of settlement that shunned the world, the elven god Corlon and the god of nature, Sylvanus, were the ones who gained the most faith. It was just that the elven king Kasia happened to be a believer of the moon god and was blessed by the moon god, which gave rise to the misconception that all the people in the elven forest believe in the moon god. Tiamat's words had caused a crisis of trust within the elven forest. After returning from the Blackwing Empire, Kasia had immediately carried out bloody reforms. Her attitude was too unyielding, and she was like a completely different person from before. This had already planted seeds of dissatisfaction in many people's hearts. The video that Tiamat had released had intensified this dissatisfaction. Rumors that the tribe king and the fairy clan had been bewitched by the evil dragon spread like wildfire. The undercurrents in the elven forest were turbulent, and the elder faction that had been in hiding rose up once again. This was a situation that Kasia was very afraid of, and it was also something that Caesar did not wish to see. From an empire's point of view, the Blackwing Empire needed a stable and unified ally that could provide trust and assistance in times of need, and not a loose and chaotic organization. From a personal point of view, Caesar did not wish for Kasia to fall into such a situation. After all, she was very good to Luna, and Luna liked her very much. If Kasia Whisperwind was abdicated, it would not be that easy to re-establish a wise elven king. However, the Blackwing Empire could not interfere with the internal affairs of the elven forest by force. That would be too obvious. Caesar could only help Kasia stabilize the situation through other means. If there was a chance, he could also help the elven forest establish a kingdom. This was what Caesar was looking forward to. He had already hinted to Kasia many times that if the elven forest succeeded in establishing a kingdom, it would become another foreign species kingdom that Iradia rarely saw. At the same time, it would also be the only elven kingdom that currently existed. It was true that the Blackwing Empire had always pursued a multiracial integration system. However, due to the ruler, ideology, social structure, and other reasons, the empire had always absorbed clans from the evil faction and the neutral faction. Those who chose to join the Northern Empire's good faction were few and far between. These kind clans that had a deep-rooted sense of alignment would reject the Blackwing Empire from the bottom of their hearts. This was something that Caesar could not solve for the time being. Therefore, he urgently hoped that the Elven Forest would stand out and open up a market segment. They would integrate the forces that the Blackwing Empire could not absorb and then join the Empire's northern trade network. At the national level, they would mutually benefit from the Blackwing Empire and face the increasingly severe situation of the North and South together. In a knowledge of the elves and other elves, Yggdrasil was the mother of life that was worshipped and revered. The branch of Yggdrasil was seen as a gift of life, a gift from the gods. After Kaja obtained it, it would not be difficult for him to perform some political acts to suppress the rebellion and establish a kingdom. In order to obtain the branch of Yggdrasil, the shapeshifters that were hiding in Abu had even written a detailed strategic feasibility report. However, Caesar did not care about this. A powerful true dragon like him could of course do whatever he wanted. If it was not for the fact that he was worried about intensifying the conflict with the Iradia countries, he would have no problem burning the pitiful kingdom to ashes. The Abu kingdom was located in the north of the central region. It was considered a rich land in the Iradia continent. It was rich in gold and silver. Other than these shiny, precious metals, the generous mountains also provided copper, iron, and other associated ores. This established its position as an energy country that was rich in raw materials. Gradually developing its handicraft industry and smelting industry, it was currently slowly transforming into a manufacturing country. In Caesar's eyes, there was only one piece of data that showed this country: bad relationship with the Blackwing Empire. The Abu Kingdom and the Northern Empire were not on friendly terms. It could even be categorized as one of the countries with the worst relationship. This was related to the ruling class of the Abu Kingdom, and also related to the commoners of Abu. In the hundreds of years of history, the people of Abu had cultivated a persevering, courageous, and hard-working spirit. The continuous mining disasters did not make them cower, and the long-term underground life made most of them quiet and cold. Most of them were unwilling to interact with outsiders. Even the ruling class seemed to be affected by this temperament. They guarded their few allies and trade chains, as if they would never move again. If their relationship was not bad to a certain extent, Caesar would not have to make a trip here personally. Yggdrasil's branch had appeared in the territory of Abu. If both sides were on friendly terms, he only needed to send an envoy and pay a reward, and the local royal family would be responsible for the search. If the local tyrant was serious, his efficiency would definitely not be bad. This alone could not explain why Caesar did not choose to send Husky, Nero, or other powerful subordinates to infiltrate Abu. It could be that after the Battle of the Three Gods, the Black Dragon Emperor had not shown his power to the outside world for a long time. Caesar wanted to take this opportunity to continue to exert his influence on Iradia. It was also possible that he was just tired of staying in his own territory and wanted to take this opportunity to take a vacation and go to the outside world to complete his childhood wish of enjoying the scenery of Iradia. Chapter 406. Jenin Town was an important town in the south of the EBS kingdom. It had 1/3 of the country's mineral resources. It used to be the center of the whole EBS kingdom, but now it was just an independent town that had escaped from the power struggle of the royal family. There is no doubt that this was a tragedy, but also a kind of irony. The dirty deals between the nobles of the kingdom of EBS never stopped, and the bard had enough creativity and material to write all kinds of stories. Caesar walked through the bustling streets of Gold and Silver Town. Since half of the men in Gold and Silver Town were miners or blacksmiths, the people there were particularly valiant. They were even more valiant than the Northlanders, who loved to fight. There were burly men everywhere who wore simple furs that exposed their upper bodies. Unlike most human cities, there were many halflings here. The number of Iradia halflings was much more than any other human race, and there was no unified government. Halflings with amazing reproductive and survival abilities could be seen everywhere, but Genine Town was especially abundant. From the town to the south, around the Bramble Mountain, there was an endless prairie that was the territory of the halflings. They had been fighting with the EBS for hundreds of years over mineral veins and territory, and the halflings' ability to mine and craft was also needed by humans. Therefore, in some border towns of the EBS kingdom, there was a strange situation where the two sides would attack each other when war broke out and do business together when war broke out. The EBS and halflings in Genine Town had always maintained this strange tacit understanding. But recently, with a large number of adventurers entering the town had become chaotic. The town was full of rumors of Eucharisil, nine-headed demon, and so on. Caesar kept a low profile, looking around like a fledgling adventurer. The mercenaries on the street roared as they hurriedly passed by. In the sound of the collision of leather armor, they stepped on a wash basin that was drying on the side of the road and knocked over the owner of the wash basin. They glanced at it and left without a care. Caesar took a closer look. It was a female centaur who had been knocked down. Her upper body was basically the same as a normal human's. Her yellowish hair was combed to the back of her head, and she wore a cloth shirt with large patches on it. Her lower body was a well-tailored skirt. She placed her hands on the ground and curled up her forehooves. She stood up with difficulty and patted the dust off her trousers. She looked at the newly dyed stain with a bitter expression. Caesar bent down to pick up the wash basin that had been kicked to the side. He took 2 steps forward and handed it over. The female centaur looked at him in surprise and thanked him in a low voice. Her voice was exactly the same as a human's. She took the basin and scooped a spoonful of water from the water tank beside the house and rinsed it again. Caesar didn't lower his head. Looking at her slightly swaying tail, he took the initiative to say, "It seems that living here isn't easy. Natural disaster, sir." Caesar's appearance was not that of an upper-class person. The centaur did not turn around and just whispered, "A sudden fire burned all our savings. My husband was forced to go into the mountains to be a guide for an outsider like you. They said they were looking for something called Euchara, goddess above. That is an extremely dangerous life. There are terror wolves, fiery mane, and mountain demons in the mountains." As she spoke, she choked with sobs. Her voice was filled with sadness and grief. What happened to him? The centaur turned around. An earthquake, a sudden one. Perhaps it wasn't an earthquake. People said it was caused by the nine-headed serpent. My husband was on a rugged mountain path when the earthquake brought rolling rocks. She sobbed. Those outsiders didn't even bring his body back. I'm sorry. Caesar sighed. This was indeed a sad story. When the centaur calmed down a little, he continued. In a sense, I'm like them. I'm an explorer from the north. Can you tell me the latest news? I heard the locals shouting about Euchara Hill and the nine-headed serpent. I'm sorry to remind you of the sad past. This is a small reward. As he spoke, he took out a silver coin from his pocket. After thinking for a while, he took out another one and placed it in the centaur's palm. That's too much, sir. I don't have any secrets. The stories that everyone knows aren't worth that much. The centaur glanced at it and declined. The kingdom of EBS, which relied on mining and smelting, was not rich. The cost of living was not high. 2 silver coins could only buy 2 meals of wine in the trading city. But here, it could last a week. In the centaur's eyes, this was a lot of money. Caesar said a few words, but she still accepted it. Thank you for your generosity, sir. Please come in and rest. I'll try to tell you everything I know. Under the centaur's invitation, Caesar walked into the small house by the street. The house was not big. There was a low window on the left and right. Next to the wall opposite the door was a wooden bed. Between the bed and the window was a cupboard. The top opened, and the bottom had 3 drawers. There was also a mirror in the corner. There were a few cracks on the edge. The pattern on the wooden base was so simple that it did not have any beauty. It looked like something that was casually drawn. Caesar found a place to sit. There was a smell of sawdust in the house. It looked like it was newly built. In addition, there was a faint smell of mutton. That was the smell of the centaur. The nine-headed serpent is not a recent news. There were legends about it in the kingdom of EBS a long time ago. Some halfling clans living in the prairie would occasionally tell stories about it. The centaur poured a glass of water for Caesar and then knelt down. It is said that it swam in the dangerous peaks and crevices of the Thorn Mountain range, swallowing all living things that could be swallowed. It is said that it has an immortal body. All of its heads must be cut off at the same time to kill it. It is 1,000 meters long and has 99 venomous teeth. Originally, this was just a legend. It was as baseless as the legend of the black dragon in the north. But it was said that a month and a half ago, the nine-headed serpent appeared together with Yukrahir. At that time, most of the miners and adventurers in the Thorn Mountain range died. Only a few survivors ran back to bring back the news. Later, they also went crazy and soon died. The people in the town were in a panic. Some said that the nine-headed serpent would destroy everything. Some said that the nine-headed serpent was holding the branches of the world tree in its mouth, waiting for warriors to challenge it. Many people planned to leave here and seek refuge in other parts of the kingdom. My husband and I also planned to leave. But for some reason, this news attracted a lot of foreigners. These rich foreigners brought a lot of vitality to the town, so we stayed. Who knew? Caesar listened and nodded. He slowly thought about it. In his memory attic, he did not find any information about the nine-headed serpent. This basically proved that this creature did not exist before Iradia. The nine-headed serpent was either a farce or an unknown creature that had yet to be discovered. Other than that, Caesar pondered for a moment and asked, "Has it appeared again?" No, but recently there have been many people who have gone missing for unknown reasons. Most of them were adventurers who went to the Thorn Mountain range. Without their loud voices, the people in the town would not have gotten any other information. Caesar smiled and stood up. "Thank you for your information. This information is very useful to me. Thank you for your generosity, sir. May the goddess bless you." The centaur stood up and bowed, thanking him again. Caesar nodded and took 2 steps back. He turned and walked to the door. When he was about to leave, he suddenly lowered his head and said, "Madam, I think if Abu's life is not easy, the north might be a good place to go." "The north," the centaur repeated. It was the first time she heard such advice. Caesar did not bother to explain. He walked out of the house and closed the wooden door behind him, acting like a normal human being. After that, he went to the shapeshifters who were hiding in EBS and questioned them. The answer he got was similar to what the centaur said. There was no more inside information. Chapter 407. Looking at the bustling Genin town, Caesar had a sense of déjà vu. For a moment, he even thought that the kingdom of EBS had learned from the advanced development experience of the north and was imitating Blackstone Town to attract tourists to boost the economy. But if there was no additional information about the shape-shifting monsters, he could basically rule out the possibility that the kingdom of EBS was spreading rumors. As he walked, he passed by a building. It was crowded with people, and a loud voice pulled Caesar back to reality. Recruiting warriors, mercenaries, and adventurers who are going to investigate the Thorn Mountain range. 1 gold coin per person. If you find any clues, you will be rewarded 10 gold coins. If you die, you will be compensated 20 gold coins. Caesar looked around. It turned out to be the Adventurers' Hall in the center of the town. This ancient structure had existed since the awakening of human consciousness at the end of the First Age, and it seemed that it would continue to exist in the future. The Adventurers' Hall had always been a place full of legends. In Iradia's various boring poems and dramas, this place was always the starting point of the story. A fallen prince embarks on the road of revenge. A fearless warrior embarks on a journey to slay a dragon. But it seemed to be the truth. Caesar looked at the unfamiliar building. In the north, the Adventurers' Hall was about to disappear. Although he was always the imaginary enemy of the adventurers and the pinnacle of life, Caesar personally did not have any prejudice against these people. But on a national level, the empire did not like these uncontrollable humans who had military power. The role of the adventurers in the Northern Empire was replaced by more excellent and efficient professions. Many visitors who had stayed in the North for a period of time often reminisced about the scene before the Reform and called the disappearance of the adventurers the death of the era. But more of the Empire's supporters did not think so. They thought that it was a reflection of the progress of the times. Back to the main topic, the reform of the Northern Empire did not spread to other places in Iradia, so the kingdom of Ebs and Jenin Town still retained their old style. The appearance of Yggdrasil not only attracted a flock of adventurers, but also caused more people to worry. The terrifying threat of the nine-headed serpent had raised the threat level of the Thorn Mountains by more than 3 levels. Mining and exploration had been forced to stop, and the nobles who controlled these important resources were anxious. They offered a high price for people to investigate the situation. So far, no one had answered. No matter which profession it was, it would quickly solidify into a pyramid not long after it appeared. Adventurers and mercenaries were a small group of people at the top of the pyramid. They wouldn't appear in the Adventurers' Hall. Their fame in the Adventurers' Hall would cause countless high-priced missions to come knocking on their door. The people gathered here were basically at the bottom of the pyramid. They had no power, no team, and no resources. To put it bluntly, they were a motley crew. Therefore, although there were a lot of people here, it was understandable that no one came forward after the mission was announced. Just as everyone was discussing, the crowd was suddenly pushed aside. A 1.8 tall man wearing leather armor and carrying a huge sword in the shape of a door stepped into the arena. "I'm a monster hunter. I'll take this job." The scene was quiet for a moment. The adventurers, mercenaries, and staff in the hall all looked at the man, including Caesar. The man was tall and straight, with square eyebrows and a righteous face. He wore a fancy chainmail on his upper body, and his towering shoulders were full of ferocious barbs. His lower body was covered in a pitch-black skirt armor. His attire was exactly the same as that of a warrior described in dramas and poems. It was as if he had run out of an opera house. Obviously, the onlookers also noticed this familiar feeling and let out low sneers. The man glared at the crowd and swept his gaze over them. He gently let go of the heavy sword he was carrying and put it down. With a thud, the huge sword directly smashed through the wooden planks and inserted itself into the stone slabs at the bottom of the floor. The onlookers felt as if they had been hit in the head by a huge hammer. They kept quiet out of fear and didn't dare to make a sound. Caesar frowned. What a joke. He had just thought that it was impossible for a powerful person to appear in this place. In the end, one had popped out of nowhere. The reality was like a slap to his face. But this didn't make sense. An undetectable ripple of energy flowed past. Caesar used his psionic ability to scan the eye-catching man. The result made him raise his eyebrows. There was a slight hesitation in his eyes. After confirming it again, he revealed a look of understanding. After using his psionic ability, the other party seemed to have discovered his existence at almost the same time. He turned his head and looked at the place where Caesar was standing. He looked up and down and didn't find anything unusual, so he turned his head back first. The person who issued the mission was an attendant of a noble family. At this time, he was overjoyed. When he saw the huge sword that looked like half a door, he knew that it was not simple. He immediately went up to the man and talked about the details of the mission. "I could take care of everything. I'm a professional monster hunter, Shaluel Marda," the man said loudly. His voice was like the beating of a war drum, forcing the attendant who was talking to him to take a few steps back involuntarily. "But with my strength alone, I can't destroy evil. Powerful monsters need the cooperation of many people to win. I need the help of more brave people." After saying that, he slowly turned around. "Hey," the spellcaster who was secretly observing just now. "Do you want to go together?" "Gladly," Caesar said with narrowed eyes. With the strong warrior and spellcaster leading the way, the remaining adventurers immediately began to enthusiastically sign up. Not long after, this motley crew was formed as the main force of the team. They immediately set off for the Bramble Mountain Range. The group of adventurers set off in a hubbub. They were excited as if they were not going to explore the giant nine-headed snake, but as if they were going to catch two wild boars. According to Caesar's judgment, catching two wild boars was not an easy task for this group of adventurers. Spellcaster, I still don't know your name. Magus Hill. The name Tangerine could no longer be used. The surname of the radiation dragon of the Blackwing Empire was Tangerine. In addition, the real name of the Black Dragon Emperor himself. This surname had already spread throughout the entire Iradia continent. Using the name of opening a path to leave the other adventurers behind, the brawny man Shallow Martha suddenly lost his carefree expression and asked in a low voice, Magus Hill, regardless of whether this is your real name or not, I want to ask, what are you going to do? Very simple. I'm going to find some clues about the giant nine-headed snake and then exchange them for gold coins and money. That's all. Stop talking nonsense. Shallow shouted in a low voice. Do you think I'm an idiot? You're not a wizard apprentice or a mid-ranked wizard. You're at least a great wizard, right? Someone like you is going to rush about for a few gold coins? Aren't you the same? I am. Shallow seemed to be stumped by the question. His lips moved for a while before he said, I'm not the same. I need money. Money is very important to me now. I know. Caesar expressed his approval. Money has always been very important. There was no need to investigate at all. As they gradually went deeper into the Bramble Mountain range, Caesar quickly smelled a dark and deep smell. That was the smell that most of the evil crawling creatures had. Under the leaves, by the river, by the rocks, it was everywhere. It seemed that the legend of the giant nine-headed snake was not baseless. There were indeed traces of some kind of large monster activity here. Chapter 408. Sarah's nose twitched, but there was no expression on his face. Caesar did not say anything and continued to lead the noisy mercenaries into the forest. They followed the dense forest all the way to the south, and all they could see were pine forests commonly seen in the Abu region. There were surprisingly few beasts, and occasionally there were some shadows of animals, but they were gone in a flash. The group crossed one or two mountains and entered the hinterland of the Bramble Mountains. Looking down, the terrain gradually became rugged. Logically speaking, such an uninhabited place should be very lush with vegetation, but the trees in front seemed to have withered, especially at the bottom of the valley, where there were rocks everywhere. This was not normal. The branches of Euchre here were part of the world tree. They were full of vitality and vitality. Even if they were not activated by injecting energy, their natural aura could turn a wasteland into a forest. However, this place was the complete opposite. Caesar thought for a moment and said, You saw it. In terms of strength, the Black Dragon Emperor was indeed standing at the top of the world, but in terms of knowledge and experience, the 50-year-old Black Dragon was far superior to most of the long-lived species, and the one next to him was one of them. Caesar's words had the meaning of inquiry. He was not worried that the monsters were too strong or too dangerous, but he was just expressing doubts about the existence of Euchresil. Well, nothing. The brawny man nodded, indicating that there was no problem, and continued to move forward. After a while, he thought for a moment, and explained in a low voice, When the branches of the world tree are just born, they need to extract nutrients from the earth to awaken themselves. When a state is stable, they will feed back to the earth to nourish all things. Where did it come from? Who knows? Maybe it's a gift from the heavens, but according to historical records, it's not easy to find it. The smell of the crawling creatures in the air gradually became stronger, and Sarah's eye showed a hint of vigilance. Nine-headed giant snake. I've never heard of such a monster. The sky gradually darkened, and the gloomy atmosphere calmed the mob behind them down. Although the team was still moving forward, they had already lit torches. Although it was not wise to light a fire in the dark, this was an adventure, not a war. Beasts and monsters were afraid of fire. After walking for a while, they finally arrived at the site of the disaster. In front of them was a mine. The news of Euchresil and the nine-headed serpent came from here. A month and a half ago, there was a devastating disaster in this mine. Of the 2,000 people present, almost none survived. The Lord of Gold and Silver Town responded by placing a few wooden planks at the entrance of the town. The planks were written in the common language and the language of the halfling. Extreme danger. Those who have not given up their lives are forbidden to enter. In the beginning, there were still many adventurers who tried to challenge themselves, but no matter if it was a group or an individual, most of them disappeared without a trace after crossing the mine. It wasn't until half a month ago that people gradually realized the seriousness of the problem and began to face the possibility of unknown monsters in the Bramble Mountain Range. At the same time, they also spread the news to Iradia. When night came, the vast land was sleeping in the darkness. Everything was silent. The silence was like a silent mourning for the dead on this land. There are living people in front. Staring at the warning sign, Sarah suddenly said. He quickly walked around the ruins of the mine and did not forget to glance back at Caesar. He really thought that Caesar was a spellcaster and was dissatisfied with his indifference. This guy looked so relaxed and casual, as if he was just here to play. This kind of thing should have been discovered by the spellcasters first. The breath of life appeared in the valley behind the mine. After entering the valley, the deeper they went, the more desolate the environment became. There was almost no vegetation on the ground, and sharp rocks followed like shadows. There seemed to be some withered old trees in the distant darkness. The cold wind in the mountains was like a ghost passing through the branches, making creaking sounds. From Sarah's description, Caesar knew that this was because the nutrients of the land were absorbed by Yukrahir. However, he did not know how to search for that thing. Just now, he used his psionic ability to scan the entire Bramble Mountain range and found nothing. The breath of the crawling creatures was also irregular. So far, there were no clues. This was not a problem, because the human in front of him knew. Previously, various signs inadvertently revealed that Sarah knew how to find the giant nine-headed snake in Yukrahir. As long as they followed his will, they would be led to the final destination sooner or later. However, due to the fact that this guy belonged to the righteous and kind camp and his deep-rooted nature, he would do a lot of time-wasting things along the way, such as now. They followed the rugged mountain path and finally found a camp at the foot of the mountain. That kind of thing is not something that mortals can resist. I shouldn't have come here for money. Maybe I could have left when I was in Jeanine Town and lived. While they were still some distance away, Caesar could already hear intermittent voices. There were about 50 to 60 people in this camp. They lit a bonfire. As for the arrival of another group of adventurers, they did not show any surprise, vigilance, or excitement. They just looked up and lowered their heads, muttering, "Another group of people coming to die. Hey, friend." In a public place, Sarah returned to his previous forthright and enthusiastic persona. He puffed out his chest and walked forward. It seems that everyone is not in a good mood. What's wrong? Did something happen to you? No one answered. Caesar looked at these people. The expressions of these people reminded him of the gray centaurs when they were first kept in captivity, the despair of being unable to resist when they were on the verge of death. If that's the case, why don't we gather together? The feeling of being ignored made Sarah's face flash with anger. In order to maintain his persona, he forced a smile. "I'm a professional monster hunter. I have a lot of experience. I could take you away." "Leave?" His words caused the people in the camp to react. A middle-aged man who looked like the leader whispered, "I've never seen anyone leave. As long as we enter the Thorn Mountain Range, we're all food." "You mean the nine-headed giant snake?" "Not to mention monster hunters. Even dragon hunters would be useless. The people outside are all wrong. It's not an ordinary monster. It's an evil creature in the legends that can fight with the gods." A gray-haired woman moved her and faced these newcomers. She hugged her knees and sat on the ground. She said to Sarah, "Just those snake and scorpion servants alone can kill everyone here, including you." "Evil creature?" "There hasn't been an evil creature in Iradia for 500 years. Sarah sneered and put down the greatsword. The blade sank into the rock. "Did you see it? It's not us who saw it. It's the army." Looking at the astonishingly heavy greatsword, a glimmer of hope appeared in the woman's eyes. However, it was immediately extinguished. She buried her chin in her arms. There are more than 5 mineral veins in the Thorn Mountain Range. Do you think that Genin town and the kingdom of Ebro would turn a blind eye to this matter and only invite adventurers to investigate? They sent an army, and then we watched as the elite army of more than 2,000 was completely annihilated in less than 3 minutes. 3 minutes? Sarah's expression became serious. He was thinking about how many minutes it would take for him to annihilate an army of 2,000. Anyway, it was absolutely impossible to do it in his human form. 3 minutes. Caesar thought for a while and continued to be in a daze. Chapter 409. Not far away from the edge of the campsite, a blood-curdling scream suddenly rang out, accompanied by the sound of a heavy object being dragged. The dust and pebbles on the ground rustled from the friction. "They're here!" It's the scorpion snake servants. Quickly approach the area with fire. Don't panic. Everyone was instantly alarmed. Among them, there's also a portion of people who calmly and carefully checked the weapons and equipment on their bodies. Although their mouths said that there was no hope, no one would easily give up on a chance of survival. Compared to the other monsters, the scorpion snake servants were slightly easier to deal with. Sarah lifted the greatsword that was stabbed into the ground and stared ahead. Not far away from the edge of the campsite, an adventurer was struggling with all his might as he was dragged upside down. Both of his hands were clawing and scratching on the ground. However, within a few seconds, he was still dragged into the darkness by a strange figure. After that, as if it had a life of its own, a dense fog enveloped the entire area, causing people to be unable to peek at it. Munch, munch. A bone-chilling chewing sound rang out from the darkness, accompanied by the sound of flesh being torn apart. The thick stench of blood caused people to feel nauseous. Damn it, Sarah cursed with a pale face. His innate sense of justice made him unable to tolerate humans being killed in front of him. Holding his greatsword in a reverse grip, he slashed forward. A bright golden radiance lit up the night sky, sweeping away the darkness. It was a pure black alien creature with a thick carapace on its body. From its appearance, it was somewhat similar to the Blackwing clan's thorn beast. However, it was much larger and more ferocious. Its carapace was filled with sharp thorns, with a human face at the front. Its mouth was filled with crisscrossing sharp teeth, and its flesh was badly mutilated. The blade of the blade that was imbued with energy swept across, chopping off its right arm. However, it wasn't fatal. After being injured, the monster let out a low cry for help, biting a large piece of human flesh and escaping. Don't chase. The campsite leader immediately stepped forward to stop Sarah, who was about to give chase. He solemnly explained the situation. This monster isn't just one, it's a group. Even now, we still don't know exactly how many of them there are. You're very powerful, but don't die just like that. Sha sha sha. Before he finished speaking, even more sounds rang out from the darkness. Something was wriggling on the ground, approaching them at a speed that was hard for people to imagine. Everyone stiffened and turned their heads to stare in the direction of the voice. Starlight sprinkled down, illuminating the source of the crowd's fear. In the open space not far away, snake and scorpion servants crawled out of the darkness one after another. Their skull-like heads were facing the crowd, saliva dripping from their mouths. A hoarse, sharp, and extremely unpleasant voice came from the leader of the monsters. "You are all food, boom." Halfway through his words, the dozen or so snake and scorpion servants who were originally aggressive all fell to the ground in an instant. The scene was like a divine punishment from the heavens. An invisible giant mountain fell with a loud rumble, heavily smashing onto their heads. The hideous-looking monsters' bodies were deformed. Their shells cracked, and their bones creaked. Their heads were squashed. Green blood and white paste seeped out from the gaps in their bodies. They were all dead. It was the wee hours of the morning, and the stars and moon were gradually hidden behind the clouds. The surroundings were plunged into darkness and deathly stillness, leaving only the crackling of the bonfire. The flickering light reflected the ravines and shadows on the surface of the piled-up rocks. This The leader who advised Sarah not to chase after them blinked his eyes, confirming that he was not hallucinating. The development of the situation was out of everyone's expectations. These monsters were actually wiped out in an instant. The shock that this scene brought to everyone was no less than a bolt from the blue. Not only him, the others were also somewhat sluggish. Their mouths were almost unable to close. This was the first time they saw snake and scorpion servants being killed so easily. Most of them were clear that these snake and scorpion servants were not as weak as they appear to be. At the very least, killing a team of 10 adventurers was not a problem. At the same time, their numbers were also unknown. They were always in the darkness surrounding the valley. They would appear every day, but they seemed to have received some kind of order. They were not in a hurry to kill everyone. Their actions of intimidation were greater than hunting. Their master, the giant nine-headed snake, seemed to enjoy this kind of game of playing with living creatures, treating them as toys. It was also because of this that they had the opportunity to live until now. Sarah slowly turned around. When it came to magic, he was a true master. Usually, just a few words of casual guidance would cause spellcasters to scramble like ducks. However, he clearly did not feel any magic reaction just now. No matter if it was the rhythm of magic or the waves of elemental elements, they did not exist at all. My previous judgment was wrong. You are not a spellcaster. You are a psionic warlock. He stared at Caesar and said in a low voice, "That time in the Adventurers' Hall, you deliberately disguised your magic fluctuations to let me discover you." Caesar's face was very calm, as if he had done something insignificant. He did not care about exposing his power. He did not even follow up on this topic. Instead, he asked, "I don't understand. Why did you bring so many people here? This place is very dangerous for them. Logically speaking, you should not want them to die." Tacitly agreeing, Sarah looked up and down at the young man in the black robe in front of him. After confirming that there was no problem with him, he responded to his question, "With my strength alone, it is very difficult to find the source of evil." Extremely boring fun, Caesar thought to himself. Fishing to enforce the law. This was the old trick of these guys. They liked to disguise themselves as humans and blend in with the crowd that could be attacked. They would then tear off their disguise at the critical moment and show off their might. This was to satisfy their overflowing sense of justice and their ultimate desire to punish evil. One could not rule out the possibility of vanity. After all, when justice was being carried out, there would always be witnesses to praise it. As one of the species that was most friendly to humans, these guys liked to have their reputation known to the outside world and be respected and worshipped by humans. Caesar did not have time to expose Sarah's little thoughts. Looking at the crushed flesh and blood, he asked, "Are these beasts also created by Yukrahir?" "That's not it. How could these things be related to the sacred world tree?" Sarah said calmly, "They are not any of the creatures that Iradia currently knows. It seems that they should be some kind of chimera or a mutated species that has been distorted. If that's the case, it's not impossible that the legendary nine-headed serpent is an evil creature." At this time, the camp leader at the side finally recovered from his daze. After all, there were not many idiots in this world. Looking at the two who were talking calmly, he could roughly guess the reason why the monster was crushed to death. After hesitating for a while, he finally walked over and asked, "Sirs, if that thing just now suddenly came in a lot, and there were even stronger and more terrifying ones, would you be able to deal with it?" "I don't know." Sarah shook his head. He really did not know. Although he roughly knew how to find the branches of Yukrahir, he had not received any information about how powerful the nine-headed serpent was. Without contact, how could he know? Caesar did not speak. He had no interest in the nine-headed serpent. Whether it was an evil creature or a godsend, as long as they did not appear in front of him and take the initiative to look for trouble, he could pretend that he did not know or see anything. After all, this was the kingdom of EBS and not the North. The Black Dragon was not a busybody like the one next to him. Previously, he used his psionic power just to save time and quickly find the branches of Yukrahir and take it away. Chapter 410. I hope we can get out of here alive. The leader of the camp was already in despair, but when he thought of the snake and scorpion servants that were crushed, he regained some of his spirit. "We will," Sarah replied, then shook her head. "But not now. True justice will never condone evil. I must first eliminate the Hydra, no matter what it is." Sarah spoke frankly, but the expressions of the others gradually changed. In the eyes of these adventurers, not taking this opportunity to escape and going to the Hydra was simply asking for death. Perhaps Sarah did not understand the feeling of being given hope and then being faced with despair, but these adventurers could not help but feel agitated. "We can only go this far. If we go any further, we will die. It's not that we don't want to punish evil, but we don't have the ability to eradicate evil. Take us back first, I beg you." Even though the adventurers said so, Sarah was still unmoved. She stared at Caesar. She knew that among all of them, only this taciturn psionic warlock could help her. "Let's make a deal." Caesar raised his head and looked at her. "I'm here for Yggdrasil. Take me to the branch of the world tree first, then I will help you deal with the Hydra." "Okay," Sarah agreed, then suddenly turned to look at the chaotic crowd that was crying and begging. So noisy. After that, she silently cast a powerful boosting spell. Suddenly, everyone seemed to have been injected with chicken blood. They raised their swords and screamed. The only camp leader who still had some resistance wanted to say something, but was silenced by Caesar's psionic silence. "Don't waste any more time." The mountains were shrouded in deep darkness, and the wind was biting cold. Leaving the wind-sheltered mountain, one could only see countless tree trunks of different sizes and shapes. Some were twisted, some were slanted, some were short, and some were tall and thin. All the tree trunks were green or gray in color. There were no leaves, but they were covered with a layer of sticky, hairy, and gloomy moss. "How annoying." Sarah stopped to look and said to Caesar, "Look at these trees. Their life force was sucked dry by Yggdrasil when it was alive, but then they were infected by an evil aura and became like this. Are you trying to say that the branch of the world tree is very likely to be with the nine-headed snake, or has even been taken over by the nine-headed snake?" "That's what I meant." The group continued to move forward, carefully avoiding the numerous twisted and intertwined tree roots. There was no more path here, but Sarah seemed to have determined the direction and went straight in. There were no shrubs in the forest, and the ground gradually rose. The further they went, the taller, thicker, and darker the trees became. Occasionally, water droplets condensed from moist vapor would drip down from the still mountain of leaves. Other than that, the entire mountain range was silent, as if even the monsters that had appeared before had left. At this moment, there was no sound and no danger, but Caesar gradually had an uncomfortable feeling that he was being watched. At first, the eyes were full of resistance, but then the resistance deepened, turning into disgust, hostility, and even hatred. This feeling shrouded everyone's heart. In the end, everyone began to rapidly raise their heads or turn their heads to scan the area, as though gravel might encounter a sudden attack. Even Sarah was no exception. He led the group in circles around the mountain until they reached the top. Unexpectedly, the sky above them was clear and blue. Because they were walking under the cover of the dark forest, they were unable to see the sun rising from the east and the darkness dissipating. Sarah stopped here. The air was filled with moisture and sunlight, making it appear gray. They could not see too far ahead, but his eyes were pointing in one direction. There, Sarah pointed at a depression not far away. "The place where Yggdrasil was born. We're almost there. I believe that our nine-headed snake should be there as well." The muscular man quickly moved forward, and Caesar followed suit. Unexpectedly, halfway through, the ground beneath his feet suddenly became empty. Bang! Caesar's vision blurred, and the scenery of the Bramble Mountain range spun. When everything stabilized, Sarah and the other human figures were no longer around. He was standing on the ground that was filled with a corrosive smell. Caesar frowned and looked at his surroundings. He raised his head to look at the sky. A green cloud of fire, like a dense liquid suspended in the sky. This kind of cloud covered the sky, casting a layer of strange color on the ground. Around the cold ground were fine and sharp gravel. There were no plants or living creatures in sight. This method is not an illusion. An unstable half-plane? Caesar thought for a moment. To have the ability to create such a place, no wonder we could not find it when we searched the Bramble Mountain range. So, a thick and sharp sickle-like forelimb covered with barbs suddenly appeared behind him, slashing towards his neck. Pooh! As though it had eyes on its back, Caesar grabbed the sickle and pulled it out, dragging a snake-scorpion servant out from the void. With a casual swipe, the monster's thick shell was pierced through, splitting it into two. Blood and mucus burst out, and the scene was indescribably tragic. Caesar licked his lips and smiled, revealing a row of brilliant white teeth. Overlapping space. I'm starting to get interested. As soon as he said that, he extended his hand forward. At the same time, a sickle appeared from the void, as though it was being handed over for him to grab. Caesar swung his hand, casually shaking off the remaining green liquid on his fingers. Then he suddenly jumped up, his body shot straight into the sky like a spring. A 2-meter-long diamond-shaped spike appeared from the clouds, spinning and slamming towards him. Clang! Steel clashed, and the spike was smashed to pieces by Caesar's palm. The front half exploded in the air, while the back half smashed into the ground at an even faster speed, letting out a muffled sound. Caesar continued to move upwards. Suddenly, there was an indescribable blockage around him, pushing him down. While maintaining his human form and without any support, Caesar lost his balance and fell. The whistling wind blew past his ears at high speed. The clouds in front of him were rapidly shrinking, and the bone-chilling wind constantly poured in through the gap in his collar. Boom! Caesar's body returned to the ground, smashing into a hard rock. The rock seemed to have been chiseled by a heavy hammer, breaking into pieces at the same time, the fragments rolling far away. Caesar flipped over and crawled up from the ground. Mortals would consider falling from a high altitude to be a land of death, but he fell without a scratch. Not only can you create half-planes, control the overlapping of space, you can also change the laws of matter. Caesar said in a low voice, "What are you?" As soon as he finished speaking, the ground under his feet shook violently, as if an earthquake had occurred that could overturn the plane. In the violent tremors, a very bad sound came from the void, as if some kind of hard object had cracked open. Crackle, crackle. After the first sound, there was a chain reaction. A huge hoof leaped across the void, stomping on the ground that was gradually stabilizing. A pair of bat wings stretched out behind it, stirring up a gust of wind. Demon. Caesar's expression became serious, but he quickly rejected this idea. He did not smell the unique scent of demons, the aura of the abyss. I am one of Monet's spawns, Monet Baylor. The demon spoke, seeming to have a certain level of intelligence. However, after the self-introduction, it roared, "Slaughter!" Chapter 411. What's going on? Sarah stood up from the ground and was about to brush off the dust on her body. Her ears twitched slightly as she focused on the slight tremors in the space. An earthquake? The camp leader replied hesitantly. Looking around, there were only 7 adventurers following them. Most of them had fallen into other half-planes and were scattered. The people stood on the dark red gravel and looked around. There was nothing in this land covered by ominous green clouds. It was quiet all around. This should be a physical space created by the giant 9-headed snake. Based on this alone, its ability is definitely above legendary. Sarah was a little worried. A monster that could grow to legendary was not easy to deal with. Moreover, this space seemed familiar, which gave her a bad feeling. "We should think of a way to leave quickly," the camp leader suggested. "That's right." Sarah squinted her eyes and looked around. She was not as carefree as before. This kind of space cannot be created out of thin air. It has a physical base. Find it and destroy it. Then we can leave. Clang! Monabler's blade and Caesar's fist collided. The difference in size between the two was huge. Monabler was almost mistaken by Caesar as a demon. He had a huge body like the Lord of the Abyss, and the huge bat wings on his back were burning with dark green flames. On the other hand, Caesar had not removed his disguise and still maintained his human body. However, their strength seemed to be about the same. Caesar could clearly feel an endless amount of power gushing out from his opponent's body. This brute force was acting on the long blade, and as he continued to increase his strength, it was also increasing. Manabler, is this the giant nine-headed snake that people speak of? As a derivative, which is also a minion, you are stronger than I thought. Caesar did not expect that the monster could still stop him even after he had increased his strength in disguise to such a level. I'm looking forward to seeing that monster. I hope it can make me more excited. He suddenly released his strength and did not continue to wrestle. He pulled his body back and took advantage of the time when Manabler was moving forward with a long blade to dodge the sharp blade. His right hand was like a knife and slashed down vertically, hitting the arm that Manabler used to hold the blade. Slash! The sound of flesh and skin being cut open. With a swoosh, Manabalo's enormous body suddenly disappeared. Caesar was stunned. Before he could react, he felt a huge force crashing down on him from behind. Rumble! He elbowed Manabler, but his humanoid limbs limited his destructive and defensive power. His elbow struck Manabler's sharp claws, but he was unable to stop the attack. The demon-like monster had appeared behind him out of nowhere. It raised its front hooves and swung its giant blade at him. Before he could react, one of Manabalo's sharp claws swept over from another direction. With a gust of wind, it slammed heavily into his waist. Bang! Caesar was sent flying and crashed into the dark red ground in the distance. Smoke and dust filled the air, and gravel flew everywhere. It was as if a large caliber heavy artillery shell had smashed into the ground. So annoying, Caesar slowly got to his feet and cracked his neck. It's been too long. I'm no longer used to my human form. I don't know how to fight, whoosh. The chain wrapped around Manabalo's body was lifted and lashed at Caesar's head. If one looked at it in slow motion, one could see that half of the black-robed man's head had caved in. His cheeks, eyeballs, and mouth were all distorted. Then, he was sent flying again as if he had been struck by lightning. Manabalo chased after him with its 4 hooves. Halfway through, it raised its long blade again. A giant claw that was almost the size of its head suddenly shot out of the smoke and grabbed its head. Roar! Manabalo let out a low roar. Its body staggered forward as if it was being pulled by a huge force. It tried its best to lean back, and its hooves left 4 deep trenches in the ground. However, it was still unable to change the situation. In the billowing smoke and dust, the smoke gradually dispersed, revealing a giant claw covered in black scales and spikes. Wait a moment. Caesar grabbed Manabalo. His body was still in human form, but his right arm had turned into a terrifying claw. As he spoke, he rubbed his face with his hand. When his face returned to normal, he began his next move. Caesar grabbed Manabalo's head with one hand and raised it high in the air. Since I can't deal with it in my pseudo form, I'll just use 1/10 of my power. His body was still only about 8 meters tall, but his right claw kept expanding until it was more than 10 meters tall. It could even lift Manabalo up. The scene was very strange and terrifying. Clang, clang, clang. Manabalo used its arms and blades to hit the giant claw that was holding it, but it was useless. Caesar's real power was terrifying. Just by comparing their sizes, the two of them were not on the same level. His right claw alone was the same size as its body. Is Euchre here with the Hydra? Caesar stared at the monster's vicious eyes and asked, "And how do I get out of here, dragon slave?" A mocking, hypocritical, and gloomy voice came out of Manabler's mouth. The words that came out of his mouth were like a venomous snake wriggling around a dead man's mouth. They were weak, small, and deadly. You think you have one, but other than decay, you have nothing, Quill. Bang. The head exploded. Dark green and tender white flesh and blood splattered in all directions. Manabalo's huge, headless body fell heavily to the ground. Sour blood gushed out of its neck like a fountain. Forget it if you don't want to talk. Caesar retracted his claw and shook off the dirt on his hand. Listening to this nonsense was killing his brain cells. I don't want to hear anything else. Caesar did not need to spend much effort to leave this space. A few years ago, his battle with the flame demon king Asliers had destroyed a half-plane. That was a real material space that had the potential to form a new world. However, this place was different. This place was just a fragile half-plane that had been created. Caesar remained calm. His claws slowly pierced into the fragile void, causing ripples of pain. Then, the space in front of Caesar began to dissolve, turning into a dark vortex that absorbed light. As time passed, the area around the vortex began to expand. From the perspective of a planar observer, a bulge appeared in this already unstable space. Then, it expanded, shattered, and quickly spread until it was devoured by nothingness and chaos. The space creator's painful what was like boiling molten iron, burning every nerve in its body. It realized that it was restricting something that was difficult to control, and this way of escaping its control would cause great damage to itself. Pleas, threats, roars, all kinds of emotions descended upon this gradually destroyed space, conveying its will to the creator of this disaster. However, Caesar continued to do as he pleased. He completely destroyed this half-plane and returned to Iradia's Bramble Mountain. Chapter 412. When Caesar left the semi-plane space, Sarah was already one step ahead of him and was waiting for him. As an ancient golden dragon with endless knowledge and experience, it would be strange if he could not escape from the alternate dimension in a short period of time. Furthermore, it was predictable that his method of escaping the demiplane would be easier than Caesar's. Both parties did not communicate. Caesar looked up and saw the three-headed snake scorpion servants on the ridge where the group was standing. He looked back at his surroundings and saw that the snake scorpion monsters had surrounded them from all directions. Those who left the demiplane alive were their only targets, especially with Caesar, who did not keep a low profile. He was like a candle in the dark night, attracting the nine-headed serpent's demonic servants. Caesar could almost hear the nine-headed serpent's hateful shriek in his mind, but he did not consider this problem. Both parties would meet sooner or later, although they might encounter more demonic servants and things like Monet's derivatives along the way. Right? Thinking of the derivatives, Caesar looked up and relaxed his neck. He reached out and pinched the back of his neck and said to Sarah, "Just now, were there any derivatives on your side?" Sarah did not ask what a derivative was, but directly shook his head. "No, we only encountered snake scorpion servants, rotten beasts, and distorted thorn flower hunters. There were no monsters called derivatives." Caesar responded and did not continue the topic. The three-headed snake scorpion servants had already closed in. They had low-level intelligence, and they stood up and hissed threateningly at the group. In a sense, these snake scorpion servants were not the nine-headed serpent's puppets, but a separate species that had been enslaved and distorted by some method, just like what the Black Dragon had done to some of the northern clans. Sarah slashed the sword in his hand, and a golden light in the air made the monsters retreat slightly. But just as he wanted to take the opportunity to say a few words to the adventurer beside him, the snake scorpion servants pounced forward with a low growl. Courting death. Sarah's anger came easily. He jumped lightly and completed a 10-meter standing long jump. When his feet landed, his upper body was already in the most standard attack posture. Using the same trick, he swept his sword. The sword came down. Without the slightest mistake, the three snake and scorpion servants were beheaded by the same sword. Caesar took a few glances at it. In terms of using a human form to disguise himself in battle, he was indeed far inferior to the Golden Dragon. Even if this level was judged by the standards of a human master swordsman, Sarah's memory might not be perfect, but at the very least, it could be said to be neat and tidy. It seemed that she had done quite a lot of disguising herself as a human, so she was rather familiar with it. However, he had far too many flaws, not to mention his excellent magic, sharp swordsmanship, and outstanding knowledge. Just the repeated use of the evil slaying slash was already a huge problem. Although he had reduced the energy used to disguise it, those who were truly knowledgeable would still be able to see through it at a glance. Forget it, I don't care. Dealing with the three-headed scorpion demon servant was not the end. In the distant depression, countless giant spiders were crawling out of the ground. They quickly filled up the depression, but they did not stop there. There was still an endless stream of new spiders. They piled up layer by layer, filling up the depression. It's them. They were the ones who massacred the army of the kingdom of EBS. The camp leader beside him exclaimed, his voice trembling involuntarily. I saw these spiders laying eggs in the stomachs of the dead with my own eyes. There are even more of them now. Hell spiders. Sarah's eyes became sharp. No matter which country in Iradia, there would not be any written records of them. I thought that they had already gone extinct thousands of years ago. Let me think. Taking advantage of the fact that these spiders had not launched their attack, Sarah said a few more words. He slightly raised his head. His pupils were scattered as he looked at the sky, as if he was searching for a distant memory in his mind. Kingdom of EBS, Bramble Mountain. A long, long time ago, this place was second only to Dormar's prosperity. Before he had the chance to finish his story, the spider army on the opposite side had already completed their integration. A huge, six-legged monster stood at the forefront of the army. Its appearance was like a beetle that had been magnified thousands of times. Its sharp horns extended upwards from its nose. Most of its body was purple in color, while its back and tail were covered in green. At the edge of its body, there were dark golden patterns. I am Monet's spawn, Monet and Ubelak. It propped itself up with its four legs and stood up. First, it introduced itself in the ancient common language. Then it switched to the hell language that the enemy could not understand. For the sake of revival, attack. As soon as it finished speaking, a black wall was rapidly expanding at a speed visible to the naked eye. In an instant, even the gray sun above their heads disappeared. A sound that sounded like thousands of iron swords rubbing against thousands of pieces of gravel penetrated the minds of all living creatures. A layer of psionic barrier rose in front of Caesar. Two people who were slightly further away from him fell into the mud with a thud. They lost their heads and blood gushed out from their necks. These damn spiders know magic. Sarah roared in anger and frustration. He pulled out his sword. Adventurers, follow me into battle. The fear and anger of others had nothing to do with him. Caesar only saw that behind the spider army, a black wall stood tall. That was the reality after the illusion. This place not only had underground caves and tunnels, they also planned to build a city on the surface. Who you are and what you want to do have nothing to do with me, he said calmly. His voice was full of penetrating power over the noisy battlefield. Hand over Yggdrasil, and I will leave. Perhaps we will have a chance to work together in the future. Powerful outsider, I know you killed Monet Baylor. The giant beetle, Ubelak, stood on top of layers of spider mountains and said, but Yggdrasil was summoned by us, and it is also the heart of the city that we prepared. If you want it, come and get it yourself. Okay, Caesar nodded. Unlike Sarah, who maintained a defensive posture, he stepped on the black ground with one foot and began to move forward. His body was full of psionic flames. Spider webs fell on Caesar's head, as well as spikes, rock spikes, and lightning, but all of them were split in half in front of Caesar. When the storm-like attacks were powerless in front of Caesar, he heard a cheer from the adventurers who had been pulled far away. Fight, fight! After realizing that their spells were ineffective, the spiders screamed and rushed forward, revealing their venomous mouth parts and forelegs. Together, they let out a roar that was very inconsistent with their identity. Flesh and blood like grass, my body like a blade. Fight! Fight! Caesar did not care, but Sarah repeated the words over and over again, feeling that it was familiar. Flesh like grass, my body like a knife. Flesh like grass, my body like a knife. Then he suddenly understood, and his expression became horrified. The fear in his eyes was like a lingering haze in the middle of the night. This is the oath of the ancient race, quel dorii. How did the spiders of the first era know and understand it? Chapter 4:13. The sky darkened, and the air in a mountain ridge seemed to have turned cold. It was a chill that could freeze one's blood. The eyes of the hell spiders turned blood red as they stared at the prey that was charging toward them. After letting out a battle cry, most of the spiders gave up on attacking with spells and instead focused on stimulating their hormones. Their strength, speed, and ferocity were all greatly increased compared to before. They know magic and can strengthen their close-range abilities. Under the canopy of the sky, a figure was leaping forward. Caesar had no intention of dodging and was closing in on the Spider Lord as quickly as possible. At the same time, he was also making inferences about the attributes of the Naira spiders. At this moment, spiritual energy was much more useful than blades, fists, claws, and teeth. His spiritual barrier had already changed its form, turning into dozens of sharp spikes that were dozens of meters long. Under the control of his willpower, the strong storm pulled the sharp spikes and pierced them in a cycle, forming a terrifying tornado of sharp blades around his body. The storm of blades was like a terrifying meat grinder that followed Caesar's advance. The storm of psionic blades turned from a glowing blue to a blood red the moment it touched the spiders. In an instant, hundreds of spiders were shredded into pieces, their limbs dancing wildly with the storm. The efficiency of the slaughter shocked and angered Anubulak. It began to use the Naira's unique summoning technique to summon cursed locusts and bloodthirsty scarabs to aid the spider army in their attack. However, it forgot that the black dragon was also a master of controlling insects. Even if Caesar did not have this talent, his body was still very resistant and suppressive to all kinds of insects. Thus, Anub-Barat could only see that the swarm of Zergs stopped halfway. They were in a dilemma and hesitated to move forward. In the end, under Anub-Barak's more forceful command, a portion of the Zergs reluctantly launched an attack. Of course, the result was not what Anub-Barak wanted. These Zergs that were supposed to be very powerful did not cause any damage to the enemy. The storm of blades continued forward without any hindrance, destroying thousands of hell spiders in a short period of time. Psionic energy and blood entangled Caesar, turning him into a crazy and cold killing machine. Anubulak stomped his feet helplessly, his forelimbs scratching the ground fiercely. The group of adventurers were also stunned. Seeing their own kind being minced into minced meat, the nether spiders kept retreating. If they had intelligence, they would have been excellent warriors. If it were the kobolds, gnolls, or even most human armies, they would have fled in defeat when faced with such an invincible enemy. Continue. Attack. Anubulak waved his limbs and roared. His energy is limited, but the nether race has an endless supply. Drain him dry, exhaust him, kill him. Anubulak was right. Even gods would run out of energy if they could not replenish their energy. Caesar could not transcend this fundamental law. As a matter of fact, the feeling of exhaustion had already crept up on him. The human form had suffered so much in a large-scale war that it was impossible for ordinary soldiers to turn the tide of the war around. Even legendary warriors and sword saints would find it extremely difficult to do so. This was also the reason why mages were given preferential treatment and respected status among the smaller species, such as humans and dwarves. This was because mages could only rely on magic to cause large-scale damage. However, this did not exist among the larger species. For example, in the hierarchy structure of the dragons and titans, it had always been the golden dragons, red dragons, and sky titans who dominated the hierarchy. Back to the main topic. Although his psionic energy was rapidly draining, Caesar did not fall into a difficult situation. On the contrary, he had achieved his goal, to get close to the Spider Lord, Monai, and Anubulak. Anubulak also realized this. The distance was too close, and before he knew it, his opponent had already rushed to his front. He realized the danger he was in. His master had created him to recreate the nether race, not to fight. In terms of individual combat ability, he was ranked at the bottom of the spawns, but his opponent was a monster who had killed Munbler. Stop him. Anubalak's limbs began to retreat. It's too late, idiot, a voice said. It sounded as soft as a mother's bed. Impossible. Anubalak jumped in shock, just like a midnight nightmare. There was still some distance before the final charge. How could this damned monster reach him in one step? His opponent had not even used his full strength. The dark caves around him used to be very familiar to him, but now they were somewhat foreign. He could enter the cave in a few steps to find a safe path, but now it felt like he was miles away. Anubalak heard himself ordering himself to take 3 steps and enter. This way, he could leave his enemy behind. The underground was the territory of the nether race. As long as he dared to follow, the countless mazes and traps would teach him the meaning of cruelty. Something had hit his carapace, but it wasn't very painful. He didn't think about where it had come from. In any case, it couldn't have been anything fatal. It was probably some broken body parts flying around on the battlefield. However, no matter what it was still sticking close to his back. Anubalak did not have the time to clean up these small pieces of trash. He stuck close to the surface and moved quickly. He entered a cave and jumped into another one. There was a deep underground tunnel waiting for him. Below, it was the underground kingdom of the Nephilim. He felt a little dizzy. How strange. As a crypt lord, why would he feel dizzy? Anubalak muttered to himself. His sharp teeth tasted something strange, and he did not know why, but he felt like vomiting. After entering the underground tunnel, he realized what was attached to his back. It was a spider leg. It looked like the forelimb of a nether spider that was used as a weapon. He did not know who had removed it. He then realized that if a spider leg entered his body, he would definitely feel something. That was indeed the case. He felt a numbing sensation in his abdomen. He lowered his head and looked at his abdomen. A small section of a spider leg was exposed, and drops of green liquid were dripping down the sharp tip of the leg. Don't worry about it, Anubalak thought. It's just a small wound. It will bleed if I pull it out. The crypt lord sped up towards the nether kingdom, but he could not turn around to see if he was being chased. He also could not figure out what had happened to him. Don't worry. My mother told me that the crypt lord was the strongest creature of the netherworld. It was cruel, repulsive, and tenacious. This injury was nothing. I just needed to hide in my palace and rest for 2 days, then I would be fine. Something banged behind him. You're not dead yet, the voice said. Anubalak turned around and saw a humanoid shadow pouncing on him. He tried his best to escape. He could feel the wound on his back. Something had penetrated his body. This discovery brought great pain to the crypt lord. Anubalak vomited, and the lower half of his body became numb. After a few steps, he fell to the ground and could only crawl with difficulty. Let me go. We can work together. Anubalak wanted to say this, but no sound came out of his throat. The shadow was already close to him and was dragging his body out. The immense pain of his body being torn apart came one after another. The crypt lord was forced to make a ho sound. The figure stopped, looked at him, and said goodbye. The voice was like the mother's soft whisper, and it made Anubalak feel a little better. Chapter 414. Is it dead? Sarah asked, staring at the giant beetle that was lying motionless on the ground. What do you think? Caesar curled his lips and looked at the spider army that was clamoring because of the death of their leader. They were letting out threatening screams and quickly gathering. It seemed that Anubalak's death had angered them beyond reason. These spiders were even more ferocious and unafraid of being injured. Just a moment ago, when Sarah saw Caesar dragging the giant beetle back to the surface from the underground cave, she immediately brought her men and rushed over to meet up with Caesar. As the situation became more and more dangerous, Sarah began to unleash her true power. She repulsed almost all the Naira spiders in front of her with her sword. She looked back at Caesar and asked uncertainly, "Is this spawn a legendary?" "No." Caesar shook his head. "It's weaker than I thought." This was the truth. He had thought that the second spawn would be stronger than the first, but that was not the case. The crypt lord did not show any fighting power in front of him. In Caesar's eyes, Embark was no different from an ordinary Naira spider, except for its larger size. The Naira race. They actually took Quell Doriai's oath as an oath, and the Crypt Lord, who was originally the king of the race, claimed to be his spawn. Sarah muttered, I have to suspect that the Naira spiders were indeed extinct at the end of the First Era. They were recreated now. Wise. Caesar nodded and praised. But where is Euchre here? Sarah looked at Caesar with resentment. She did not understand a person like him who had no curiosity and desire to explore. While Caesar was blocking the Naira spiders, she used a spell to look for it and said, It's here. Before she could finish, a storm came whistling. The ground shook violently, and the mountains rumbled. Accompanied by the creaking of giant trees, a huge figure emerged from the mountains. The Naira spiders let out mournful cries, turning from bloodthirsty, venomous creatures into docile chicks. They scattered like birds and beasts, burrowing into the caves they dug and disappearing without a trace. The depression in the Bramble Mountains was filled with a strong airflow. It was the breath of the giant creature, long and deep. Nine-headed giant snake. Monet. Everyone was trembling with fear. Only Sarah and Caesar, who were not humans, remained calm. They raised their heads to look at the gigantic figure. Rather than calling it a hydra, it was more accurate to call it a chimera with 9 heads. Beneath its gigantic body was a row of fleshy limbs covered in mucus, which it used to cross mountains and rivers quickly. None of the 9 heads looked like a snake. Instead, they looked more like a lizard. If one looked closely, it even bore some resemblance to a real dragon. This fellow's neck alone was tens of meters long, and its incomparably huge body extended all the way to the depths of the darkness on the other side of the mountain. It was at least hundreds of meters long and was much larger than any of the giants that Iradia currently had. When it let out an overlapping roar, a strong stench immediately assailed their nostrils. Disgusting fellow. Caesar tilted his head. This guy's smell was even more disgusting than the battle lizardman's. If it wasn't hiding in the demiplane, the entire Bramble Mountains would be able to smell its stench. Sarah laughed, then pointed at the forehead of the Monet's middle head and said, Do you see the flower mark on its head? It swallowed Euchre here, but the branch of the world tree cannot be digested. It is still in this fellow's stomach, and it is shown through the mark on its head. Don't go. Sarah pulled back Caesar, who was about to go forward, and said calmly, This monster is at least a legendary. You used too much energy to kill that derivative just now. Let me do it. He had been waiting for this moment for too long. Golden dragons had a sense of justice that ordinary people could not hope to achieve. They had sympathy for the weak and their lifelong pursuit of punishing evil and promoting good. At the same time, they also had a strong desire to show off their strength in front of everyone. These things could bring them extreme satisfaction that far exceeded the extreme satisfaction that came from mating. This was even more so for the ancient golden dragons who had no offspring. This was not a bad thing. This world needed these creatures to maintain order. For most of the metallic dragons that were not bigoted, Caesar had an attitude of appreciation and a certain degree of affection, especially after he changed his identity and became the one who made the rules. Since he had already met the culprit, Caesar was no longer in a hurry. He did not mind spending more time, remaining calm and unruffled as he waited for Gu Jinlong's performance. The 9-headed giant snake, Monet, approached them greedily. Other than looking at Caesar with eyes full of hatred, it seemed to be full of curiosity towards everyone else. That's right, it was curiosity. This kind of emotion was the reason why these survivors were able to survive until now. It seemed to have just been born and did not have any hostility. However, its actions out of curiosity caused great harm to the weak who entered the Bramble Mountains. This was something that Gu Jinlong would never allow. Sarah was now completely different. Golden particles floated around her body, finally forming a pair of illusory wings behind her back. The greatsword warriors stood in the air, directly facing the giant snake that was rapidly approaching. With golden flames burning in her pupils, Sarah slightly narrowed her eyes. When the distance between them was less than 1,000 meters, she suddenly held her sword with both hands and swept it horizontally. In an instant, the wind and clouds changed. A golden line pierced through the earth, burning fiercely. This was the real evil slash, infinitely magnificent in the vast sky. Sarah was like a god descending from the heavens. The aurora cut off the giant snake's mountain-like head. Even after piercing through its body, there was still a remnant, flickering divine aura that did not fade away for a long time. The passers-by were very competent to let out a burst of exclamations, worshipping as if they had seen the arrival of a god. However, Sarah's expression was still dignified. She could only exert strength close to that of a legend in her disguised state. Since this monster was still a legend, it should not be as easy to deal with as it seemed. Roar! The spurting blood immediately stopped. The giant snake let out a roar when it was injured. It was enraged. It raised its 8 heads, and the head that was cut off was regenerating at a speed visible to the naked eye. Then it opened its mouth and breathed out. In an instant, gold, green, blue, purple, red, all kinds of indescribable gorgeous colors burst out from the monster's mouth, illuminating every inch of the sky and earth. This is dragon's breath? Caesar was stunned for a moment. From his point of view, this was clearly the dragon's breath of golden flame, ice, lightning, acid, and all the other metal dragons other than the white dragon. These dragons' breath of different attributes mixed together to form such a magnificent color. No, not good. Among the panic-stricken crowd, looking at the terrifying energy pouring out from the monster's mouth, their faces were filled with unease. Following which, a loud and clear dragon's roar resounded, and an even brighter and purer breath burst out from the other side. Dragon. The people's voices were filled with amazement, filled with excitement and joy after surviving a calamity. It seemed that Sarah had achieved her goal. It's a golden dragon. It's this fellow. Caesar made a sound of whom he had seen this ancient golden dragon before. Chapter 4:15. The ancient golden dragon's breath was somewhat similar to Caesar's. The outer part of the breath was a violent orange-red color, and the deeper it went, the lighter the color became. That was a sign of the rising temperature, and at the very center was a blazing white light, so hot that it could instantly vaporize marble. In the other direction, the 9-color breath was very dazzling, like a brilliant rainbow. Monet adjusted the angle to let them converge, and finally collided with the breath of the ancient golden dragon Shama. Oh, perhaps now he should be called Karl Duramplet Stannis, the ancient golden dragon with the title of Gilded Fire. Caesar remembered this guy. When the Black Dragon first ruled the northern kingdoms, he once visited the Blackwing Kingdom as an emissary of Bahamut to persuade Caesar to listen to the teachings of the Platinum Dragon God. But the Black Dragon perfunctorily turned him away. In the blink of an eye, many years had passed. Let's put aside the small talk for now. The collision of the two breaths was very exciting. The two cone-shaped energies intertwined at the widest point, and then annihilated each other, bursting out countless tiny particles of various colors. The intense collision of energies caused the small rocks on the ground to jump up and leave the ground. After a few seconds of stalemate, the dragon's breath overpowered one of them. After all, dragons were known for their breath. Monet's giant serpent also realized this, and he took a detour to avoid the remaining flames, which had already lost a lot of power, and then rushed up at an even faster speed, wanting to engage in close combat with the golden dragon. To judge a life form's melee ability, one would first look at its attack and defense methods, then its speed, strength, and weight. For a gigantic monster like the 9-headed Hydra, its melee ability should be ranked among the top in all of Alodia. On the other hand, the Beholder and the Spirit-Sucking Monster would be a negative example. Although these races were more terrifying, their melee abilities were definitely not that great. However, the Golden Dragons were a proud race. Despite knowing this, Stannis was still confident that he could gain the upper hand in close combat. After all, they could fight back and forth with the Red Dragon. In the land of Iradia, these top dragon species really couldn't find any opponents. As expected, although there wasn't an overwhelming advantage, the gold dragon had indeed taken the initiative. The reason why Stannis was chosen as an emissary by the Platinum Dragon God was precisely because his various abilities were at the peak of the material world. Whether it was magic or close combat, he was worthy of being called a master. There's almost no better way to defeat him than to crush him with absolute power. Although the Monet serpent was stronger and faster, in Stannis' eyes, this monster was primitive and crude. Its body was full of flaws, and it didn't even know how to use its advantages. Its actual combat skills were even worse than the lowest level of dragons. The golden dragon relied on its much smaller body to fight the nine-headed serpent. In just 3 minutes, it dealt more than 20 effective damage to the serpent. Moreover, the attack it received was only a single bite. It quickly broke free from the serpent's attack. However, as time passed, the ancient golden dragon gradually became more and more tired. The main reason was that the nine-headed serpent's self-healing ability was too strong. This monster displayed an evil regenerative ability. Even if 2 or 3 of its heads were torn apart, it could still regenerate quickly. Until now, there wasn't a single wound left on its body. I say, you really are an excellent teacher. Caesar suddenly appeared in the middle of the battlefield where both sides were roaring nonstop, and said with a sarcastic tone. The gold dragon dodged the huge head that crashed towards him, and its sharp teeth almost scraped his skin. Stannis didn't turn around, and only replied, "What do you mean? Don't you understand?" If I knew, I wouldn't have distracted myself and asked you." After no longer disguising as a human, the gold dragon's pride was completely exposed. You should know that this monster's true strength should be spatial manipulation. That kind of half-plane space. Although the structure isn't stable, I think even you can't do it, right? To hell with spatial manipulation. Even Iradia's dragons can't do it. Stannis was scratched by a claw, and bright red blood spurted out. He blamed this mistake on being distracted and shouted, "Damn it! What are you trying to say, you inexplicably superior little guy?" What I want to say is that it hasn't used any of its abilities until now. Caesar tilted his head to avoid the lightning that the Monet serpent spat out and said, "Don't tell me that a legendary monster doesn't have any special abilities. It doesn't even treat you as an opponent. It's just playing with you and learning more battle techniques from you. Haven't you noticed that it's getting harder and harder to avoid its attacks? It's not you who's getting weaker, it's getting stronger. It's getting stronger at an unimaginable speed. It's learning to perfect itself quickly." Caesar sighed. "This is a newborn that was just born. How can this be?" Gu Long was obviously shocked by this conclusion, and the moment of distraction made it harder for him to deal with the attack. "Where did it come from? I should be the one asking you this question. Demons, the Nether race, Monet, Quell Dorii, what's the connection?" The Nether race, or the Nether Empire, was a cruel and violent spider empire that was trampled and destroyed by the Titans in the First Era. The Golden Dragon tried to distance himself from Monet's attack range, and said while thinking Quell Dorii was a native race in Iradia during the Lost Era. I wasn't born then, and most of the elders who knew about that period of history had already passed away. The few ancient dragons who were still alive chose to go to the astral plane to gain more life. I can only obtain fragments of that history from inheritance and some ancient books from the First Era. Monet. He stared at the giant serpent and thought over and over again. Then his pupils shrank, and he suddenly shouted, "Human, help me kill it." Monet isn't the name of a race or creature. It's a war weapon created by Quell Dorii to fight against the Dragon God and Dragon Queen. With the recovery of its own will, it will become stronger and stronger. Not far away, the Monet's colossal serpent suddenly waved its 9 heads and roared towards the sky. Its 6 heads on both sides of the serpent turned bright red and cold as they stared at the ancient golden dragon Stannis. The surrounding space suddenly froze. The golden dragon wanted to struggle, but his movements were not as fast as before. He was as slow as a sloth. He tried hard to construct a spell in his mind, but the frozen space froze along with his thoughts. Even if he wanted to rely on magic to escape, it was impossible. Bahamut above, looking at the three heads of Monet rushing towards him, the golden dragon couldn't help but pray. "That's good news, Stannis." A familiar voice. You seem to have heard it somewhere before. Wait, how does he know my real name? I was prepared to tell these humans my real name after I won. As the golden dragon was thinking, he realized that the frozen space suddenly shattered. Before he could turn his head, he saw an exaggeratedly large claw over his head, grabbing the necks of the two heads of the Monet serpent. The thick claw that was covered with black scales and thorns pulled, and Monet's body that was hundreds of meters long was pulled forward involuntarily. There was a rumbling sound under his body that sounded like a landslide. "You said that this thing is a war weapon?" Stannis turned around and met a pair of eyes. That excited tone made his hair stand on end and his body tremble. He felt an even greater fear of impending doom than before. Chapter 416. A huge and irregular shadow shrouded the land. The adventurers tried their best to raise their heads, trying to see what new thing had blocked the sunlight, but all they could see were large pieces of armor-like scales, inverted triangular wings that looked like blades, jagged and protruding joints, and sharp barbs. It hovered in the sky, and the air rumbled loudly. Another dragon. Black dragon. The adventurers let out a few sporadic screams, but most of them were tongue-tied, as if their souls were being crushed by a torrent. The shock was not only because they had seen two dragons in one day, but also because of the pressure of being on the verge of death. When the black dragon's huge body appeared, it was as if the whole world was pressing in on them from all directions, making them feel as if their bodies were being twisted and squashed. Fear, anxiety, nervousness, and trembling all mixed together, making their throats and tongues lose the ability to speak. This was not the suppression of the dragon's power, but more like the feeling of insignificance and powerlessness when staring at the whole abyss. Gold Dragon Stannis also felt it. The scales all over his body opened up, and his body trembled involuntarily. After trembling for a while, he said hesitantly, "Ancestral. Ancestral dragon? No, Iradia only has one ancestral dragon, Blue Dragon Alex," Caesar denied easily. "On the Black Dragon, Stannis, have you forgotten?" Black King. Stannis, of course, remembered Caesar Tangerine. After seeing him, the Gold Dragon's aura was much weaker. For the only true Dragon Emperor in the north, different regions and races had different names for him. Most of the ferocious species in the north called him the Dragon King, or Black Emperor, while the Metal Dragons, Elves, and Dwarves called him the Black-Winged King, or Black King, which was also a reflection of the differences between factions. "Why, you seem to be scared." As Caesar said, he pulled out the two heads of the great mole snake along with the spine in its body. "Don't worry, I have a good impression of the Metal Dragons, and I have a good relationship with the Platinum Dragon God." "Not bad, my ass." Stannis tried his best to wipe the blood off his face. "Damn Black Dragon, His Majesty Bahamut hasn't settled the score with you for stealing the dragon egg and changing the inheritance. Don't act like we're familiar with each other." "Right, what happened to him just now?" When he heard that Monet was Quell Doriai's weapon of war against the Dragon God and Dragon Queen, this guy seemed very excited. The Black Dragon's body was 50 meters long, which was considered huge among the giants in Iradia. However, it was still quite a distance away from Monet. Even so, the Black Dragon still had an absolute advantage in terms of strength. His small body easily pulled the great Hydra left and right, as if he was pulling a huge ball of cotton. Monet's original heavy body and rapid speed were almost non-existent, allowing the Black Dragon to twist and turn at will. Only the landslide and rolling stones caused by the collision of the body showed the true weight of its body. Although the Hydra had the ability to heal itself, it was not that it could not feel pain. When its head was pulled out along with its spine, the excruciating pain made it even more ferocious and violent. It madly attacked any living creature in its line of sight. There was nothing that could stop his body, which was like a tsunami, other than greater pain. Caesar grabbed Monet's head and used his neck to tie a few dead knots on the ugly monster's head. This made Monet even more furious, but the more it struggled, the more pain it felt. After a while, the pain subsided and Monet was a little scared. It curled up and wanted to go back to its half-plane. In the end, halfway through, it was forcefully pulled back, and its head was once again lost. The pain caused Monet's giant snake's tail to furiously slap the ground. It was as if an earthquake had occurred in the Bramble Mountain range. The mountains shook once again, and many of the already sparse mountain paths collapsed. Monet glared at Caesar. His mouth, which had already healed, opened and let out a hysterical scream. A cold and damp air rushed through the valley, frozen space. Then its face was smashed. Caesar swung his tail to shut it up and said to Stannis, "You just told me that this monster was created as a weapon of war? Quell Doreai's evil creation." Stannis nodded. "This is a race that can only be described as crazy. The idea of enslaving the true dragon led them to the end of their road. After the great dragon god and the powerful dragon queen descended in their true form, these guys still wanted to resist. Monet is a chimera created by the ignorant Quell Doreai, using the god of Io as a template." Caesar looked at the roaring Monet's giant snake on the ground and clicked his tongue. Not at all. Now it seems so. Stannis agreed. But at that time, Monet was the most feared enemy of all dragons. The unrestrained Quell Doreai created the cornerstone of becoming a god, Goffire, and successfully implanted it into Monet's body. Now, maybe it has lost too much time, so it became like this. "Wait," Stannis said, and inadvertently saw the black dragon's eyes getting brighter and brighter. He suddenly shouted, "Caesar, what are you thinking? No, don't think about that nonsense. Kill it. Quell Doreai's technology is far beyond this era. It will not become your puppet. You are playing with fire. I will kill it, but not now." Caesar no longer looked at the golden dragon. He landed on the ground, and a 9-colored breath collided directly with it. The gorgeous colors on the black dragon's body were constantly lit up and then extinguished. The energy that could annihilate a river only caused a small splash on the black scales that were like armor, and then it immediately disappeared and returned to normal. The black dragon did not move until the breath of the great Hydra dried up. Caesar looked down at the half of his body that was completely covered by the breath. At this time, it was completely covered by the black and red magma shell. Some of the scales melted and dripped down, and the stinging pain of burning was transmitted to his nerves. He could not take it without being injured. This was only a legendary, much weaker than Aslier's. Caesar's body was quickly recovering, showing the same rapid self-healing ability as Monet, but he still sighed. The bio-boost armor was gradually losing strength. If the Black Dream did not move, he would have to find a way to upgrade it himself. This thought flew around in his head and then flew away. He had many other things to do at the moment. Caesar approached the great Hydra and easily tore through Monet's spatial seal. He stepped on it, and his sharp claws cut into the flesh and bone. The black dragon held the great Hydra's spine and let out a low groan. He flapped his wings, and in the dark red flames, lifted this monster that was hundreds of meters long into the sky. The platinum dragon god's enemy is Tiamat, and my enemy is Tiamat too. You should be happy that I am taking it away. No, that's different, dragon variant. You can't understand what happened in that era. Stannis roared in despair. The gap between him and Caesar was like a chasm. Rashly stopping the Black Dragon Emperor was the same as seeking death. Monet was taken away, and he could only watch the disaster happen, unable to do anything. Boom! The great Hydra continued to twist and struggle, and then it was pressed down by Caesar and crashed into a mountain. After that, it quieted down a lot and was carried away by the Black Dragon Emperor. Flying at high speed was a very scary thing, especially when there was no protection. When Caesar's speed surpassed the speed of sound, the violent air currents became as sharp as blades and left thousands of holes on the great Hydra's body. At the same time, Monet used his spatial ability several times to try to break free, but there was little to no effect. A body that was close to that of a demigod was difficult for a legendary creature to shake. When Stannis hurriedly left with the adventurers and was about to pray to his god, Caesar also brought the great Hydra back to his kingdom, the Tahala Desert. The great Hydra's claw stepped on the back of Monet's neck, and one of its heads was stomped into the sand. The other 8 heads were forced to bow down, and the pressure from the great Hydra made the cartilage of the cervical vertebrae groan in pain. Only the hard bones were still trying to support the weak blood vessels and nerves. Well, I think the wisdom of a legendary monster is not lower than that of a kobold. You should be able to understand what I'm saying. Caesar stared at the great Hydra, whose eyes were full of hatred and fierceness, and said, "I want Euchre here. Are you going to spit it out yourself? Or do you want me to take it out from your stomach?" Monet obviously understood. It stared at the black dragon for a while and strangely calmed down. The pain from before seemed to have taught a lesson. After a pause, the great Hydra slowly opened its mouth, and something was vomited out from the head that was close to Caesar. The thing that was vomited out was a branch, but it was difficult to describe its beauty, holiness, and majesty. However, it could be described as a branch of the world tree. Be good. Caesar put away the spotless branch, removed the claw from the great Hydra's head, and treated it like a pet. "Let's talk about you, Monet. You heard what the Golden Dragon said. I want to know, how did Quel'Dorii create you?" "Quel'Dorii has nothing to do with me." This was the first time the great Hydra spoke. Its voice was choppy, but it was very clear. "I'm a spawn." Caesar was a little surprised. "I am Monet Hydra," the great Hydra said calmly. The serpent said calmly, "The mother said that I am the child that most resembles it. Judging from your reaction, it is right." Yes, the Hydra had never admitted that it was Monet. It was only because of its appearance at the end and its devouring of Euchre here that Stannis' perception was distorted, and it also led Caesar astray. This could also explain why the Hydra was like an ignorant newborn. It was indeed born not long ago, and it was not a weapon of war, nearly 10,000 years ago, as Stannis said. Caesar slowly raised his neck and took a breath. "Since you are just a spawn, you want to kill me?" Hydra raised its head and looked at the great Hydra. "But we still have to thank you. Euchre here is a small part of the seal, and it is also a gift from Monet to you. Baelor, Anub'alak, me, and other spawns will awaken with the mother, and then..." The dragon's flames swept across, and everything turned to ashes. "What does it have to do with me?" Caesar pursed his lips and stared at the branch of the world tree. Then he spread his wings and returned to the Blackwing Kingdom. At the same time, in the forbidden mountains of the kingdom of Abu, small cracks were spreading on the surface of the ground. The space suddenly shook, as if some unknown creature had hit a material barrier. Chapter 417. How's the situation in the Elven Forest? Caesar asked as he sat on a huge iron chair covered with thorns. It was the second day since he returned to the Blackwing Court from the Thorn Mountains. "Not good." Pavel, the leader of the wild boars who was summoned to the court, replied, "The words of the Dragon Queen caused a lot of trouble in the Elven Forest. Those who believe in the Moon Goddess are still loyal to the Elven Queen, but those with other beliefs are not so easy to appease. Some conflicts have broken out in the Elven Forest. Currently, the situation is still under control." Caesar nodded. "What about Garcia's policy? We can only try to calm the situation. However, the Elven Queen has sent someone to the court. She wants us to temporarily withdraw from the Elven Forest to prevent further internal conflicts among the elves." Pavel pondered for a while and added, "Your Majesty, according to the current situation, the Elven Forest will be involved in a civil war within the year if there is no external intervention. We are sure of this. The Elven Queen's position is not stable. The Elder Council is restoring its legitimacy." "So serious?" The wild boars were always straightforward and would not exaggerate. There was no doubt about this. Black Dragon thought for a while and climbed out of the dark palace. I'll go. When a huge black shadow passed over the elven forest again, the elves had different reactions. Some bowed respectfully to the black dragon, some were indifferent, and some looked at him with hostility. He landed in the forest and waited for a while. The guards of the Taya elves quickly surrounded the place. After that, their leader, Garcia Whisperwind, appeared. Her temperament had not changed much compared to before. Her face still had the solemn expression of a ruler, but she looked a little haggard. Garcia adjusted her state of mind as she walked. Under the current tense situation in the elven forest, she had to face the black dragon with a more appropriate attitude than usual. The dragon and the elf bowed to each other. No matter what the truth was, Caesar still had to treat Garcia as his equal on the surface to protect the pride of the elves. As for the real relationship between the two, there was no need to elaborate. It was more complicated. Without any pleasantries, he went straight to the point. Has the elven forest been in a bad situation recently? Kasha followed beside the black dragon and strolled by the crescent lake. She was half a step behind him. Indeed, the Dragon Queen's fable is not only targeted at the Northern Empire, but also the elven forest. After that, half of the upper echelons voted to re-examine the relationship with the Empire, and the elders' forces hidden in the dark also quickly rose up. Is the army not under your control? Yes, but the elven forest is not the Blackwing Empire. Violence is our last resort. Garcia shook his head. I left some leeway in the last reform. The survival of the entire race cannot be controlled by a very short system. A certain degree of freedom is truly suitable for the descendants of elves. What we are pursuing now is human rights, law, and justice. A specialty of the elven forest. Caesar smiled. 2 days ago, 1,500 believers of the god of nature joined the opposition movement. They held a meeting under the Ancient of Knowledge and used extreme methods to drive away the moon god's people. The believers of the god of nature are the most powerful in the elven forest and the most difficult to deal with. Garcia looked worried. To be honest, this matter is very difficult to deal with. After the conflict broke out, the moon god's people were determined not to coexist on the same land as them, and I can't imprison all of them. That would cause even more chaos. I have a feeling that this is just the beginning. They have been incited. The god of nature is a neutral, kind, and gentle god. It is unrealistic for him to send down such an oracle. Not only that, these believers will probably be condemned by Sylvanus. I understand. Garcia was not confident, but I can't find the instigator behind the scenes. Although I have some guesses, I have evidence. Also, as for whether they will be condemned, I don't know. Caesar commented, "Your methods are too gentle." Why? Did Tiamat's words make you waver? I remember that you were not like this when the elven forest was reformed. I accepted your suggestion and listened to the teachings of the moon god. Garcia did not hesitate on this point. The taste of power is not good sometimes. Everything I do is not to protect my position as the elven king, but for the prosperity of the elven forest. For prosperity, Caesar nodded, then knelt in front of the crescent lake. Then, have you ever considered making the elven forest an independent kingdom? The elven forest has existed for 2,000 years, and no king has ever had such an idea. Kasia stood beside the black dragon. The hot air from the lake lifted the hem of her skirt, revealing her smooth and tender calves. Because of this, the elven forest has been weakening. The elven forest now is not the same as the elven forest 2,000 years ago. Caesar's eyes stared at the center of the lake. I thought you knew. Why do you want to facilitate this? The emergence of a new kingdom is not good for the Blackwing Empire. Garcia tucked a strand of silver hair behind her ear. After a few years, you can't guarantee the attitude of the new elven king towards the Blackwing Empire. This is Luna's home, Caesar said in a low voice. Luna likes it here. I don't want to interfere too much with the elven forest, but you all need to have some power to protect yourselves. The future is unpredictable. Things like the attack on Koer might happen again in the future. He was speaking the truth. Luna. Garcia repeated the name. How is she after the wedding? Her parents miss her very much. So do I. Oh. Emperor Black Dragon's heart softened. She's fine, but the little girl has been sleeping more and more. She has been growing a lemon in the garden these past 2 days, and even asked a caster to speed up the growth. Is that so? Kasia smiled and moved closer to the giant dragon, leaning against its tail. Seeing that the black dragon did not mind, half of his body gently leaned against its scales. To be honest, I envy her. She is carefree and enjoys the love and protection of others. The Elven Queen said softly, "But I am different. I have reached this position. All Elven descendants are my people. I have to protect them. It is not easy." Actually, Garcia was very young among the Taya elves. Without the cold mask of the Elven Queen, she was just a young girl who wanted to be protected. Unfortunately, after witnessing the power of the Black Dragon, there was no one in the Elven Forest or even the entire North who could give her a sense of security. Let's not talk about it anymore. Garcia recovered from her wandering thoughts and returned to the topic. It is not easy to build a country. Moreover, the Elven Forest is currently unstable. If we handle it well, we may be able to resolve the conflict. But if we make a mistake, the Elven Forest will be on the verge of splitting apart. We lack an opportunity. Caesar was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Have you heard of Ukrahere?" Chapter 4:18. Caesar was silent for a moment and then asked, "Have you heard of Ukrahere?" The world tree. Garcia thought for a moment and then said with certainty, "The legendary oak tree that gave birth to the world. It is the backbone of the main material world and the ancestor of all things. But not including dragons. Yes, Ukrahere gave birth to everything in the material world and dragons. We all know that the first dragons were astral creatures, so were the titans." Although she followed Caesar's words, Garcia still had doubts in her heart. She did not understand why the Black Dragon Emperor mentioned Ukrahere. Although the world tree was worshipped by the elves as the ancestor, it was nothing in the eyes of the dragons. Could it be? Almost following her train of thought, Caesar took out the branches of Ukrahere and placed them on the lush green grass by the crescent lake. The branches of the world tree were ancient grayish-brown, with smooth texture on the surface that one could not bear to part with. Green buds swaying in the air dotted the branches. The shape was not outstanding, but the aura it emitted was unparalleled. The vigorous energy surged like waves, and in just a moment, the grass around it became lively and began to grow crazily. Garcia almost jumped up. It was the first time Caesar had seen such an expression on the Elven Queen's face. It was a mixture of shock, suspicion, surprise, and infatuation. It was a different kind of expression on her face. After a long while, Garcia murmured, "The branch of the world tree." The sea of clouds moved slowly, and a ray of sunlight entered her eyes, making the Elven Queen come back to her senses. She stared at the branch of Ukrahere again and said with certainty, "The branch of the world tree." Then, with great difficulty, she looked away and raised her head to look at the Black Dragon Emperor. "It is not a god's creation, but it is more sacred and precious than a god's creation. It only exists in legends." "How did you get it?" "Unlike the Elven Forest, the Empire also has control over the other areas of Iradia. When it appears, it is not difficult to find it." Caesar's voice was faint, like the ultimate villain in the secular story who had great power. "Goddess serene above," Garcia said in a low voice. Garcia exclaimed in a low voice. He extended his hand, wanting to touch the branch of the world tree, but hesitated and stopped. "It's yours." "Ah, why else do you think I brought it here?" Caesar said as he stood up. "To show off to you? I don't have that kind of hobby. Show me what it can become in the hands of an elf. Jesse." "Right here. Right here." Garcia's eyes were bright as she stared at the branch of the world tree that was lying on the ground. At this moment, a terrifying idea suddenly popped into her mind, to take it for her own and keep it forever. But soon this thought was thrown to the back of her mind. She knew that this was the common selfish desire of all intelligent creatures. After staring at Yggdrasil for a while, the Elven Queen's eyes became firm and sincere. She closed her eyes and sank her spirit into the branches of Yukrahir. She only needed to inject a trace of intimate magic power, and the natural energy in Yukrahir was awakened and activated. Caesar seemed to hear the singing of the crescent lake, and the whole forest was cheering. Jessie opened her eyes again. When the sunlight shone on the shore of the lake once again, a branch suddenly sprang out from the lush green grass. It shone with a strong green light and sprouted at an unbelievable speed. The trunk, which was originally only as thick as a human's arm, kept expanding in diameter like an inflated balloon, forcing the dark dragon and the elven queen to retreat slowly. Several minutes later, the trunk was immersed in the lake, and the natural energy of the whole forest gathered. The lake rippled slightly and then became bigger and bigger, as if a large furnace was boiling the crescent lake. The ripples turned into waves, and then into waves, pouring into the branches of Yukrahir. In the next moment, the tree grew explosively. The scale of time no longer existed on Yukrahir. It almost crossed thousands of years of growth in an instant. When the small tree became a towering tree, it had been discovered by many elves with excellent eyesight, and it was still growing. In their field of vision, the sharp branches of Yukrahir were rapidly expanding into a canopy that covered the sky. Every second, tens of thousands of swaying green leaves appeared, casting a large shadow. At this moment, almost all the elves in the Forest of Elves raised their heads, squinted their eyes, and looked at the giant tree that suddenly appeared in the distance, murmuring to themselves. Boom! It really exploded. The ground where Yukrahir was standing exploded. Smoke and dust billowed, and rocks flew into the sky. A thick yellow root squeezed out of the ground, like a giant snake rolling in the rocks, and wildly plunged into the water in the center of the crescent lake, setting off loud noises and huge waves. As if it had been bombarded, the sound of explosions rang out incessantly. Hundreds of thick tree roots shot wildly in all directions, turning the peaceful elven forest upside down. At this point, the great change was not over. It was still growing, as if it would never stop. The loud creaking sound of the trees' growth gradually overwhelmed the roar of the roots sinking into the ground. When the elves cut down the tree, they could hear the friction of the branches, but for the first time, they realized that the rhythm of growth was so moving and majestic. It was like the song of victory at the beginning of the world. The continuous creaking sound in the unique rhythm was deafening. The elves lost their hearing in the wild song of life. They could only open their mouths wide to express their panic and fear. Even the powerful Emperor Black Dragon could not help but be inexplicably surprised by this strange scene. This was not within his expectations. When the wild song came to an abrupt end, every living being in the forest fell into a trance as they stared at the gigantic figure in the middle of the forest. The branches that extended into the distance were even wider than houses, and billions of leaves formed a glorious canopy in the sky. Looking at the 2,000 years of the elven forest's rise and fall, nothing could be more shocking than this. Everything else became insignificant dust in comparison. Garcia was lifted to the crown of the world tree by the dragon. Every inch of Yukrahir's texture was intimate with her. When she reached out her hand, the lush leaves immediately swayed, emitting a soft green light. Looking down from above, she saw countless elves, giant eagles, chimeras, and unicorns gathering in this place. Now it's time for you to perform, the black dragon whispered in her ear. After that, he flapped his wings and left without saying anything else. Garcia stared at the huge figure of the black dragon disappearing into the horizon. She lowered her head again and looked at almost all the elves gathered by the crescent lake. She took a deep breath and said loudly, "Children of the Forest of Elves, on the 36th day of the third era of Iradia, 1662, the Forest of Elves announced the establishment of the Kingdom of Taya. The glory belonged to Taya. The elven king Garcia declared that the Kingdom of Taya was a country of all kind races. Every willing participant would be granted full freedom and rights, and, at the same time, must bear the corresponding responsibilities and obligations. Chapter 419. Crinder Statham stood on the deck as a gentle breeze blew from the sea. It was warm, moist, and salty. The air seemed to sync with the clouds, and the rising sun was barely visible. Occasionally, seagulls would fly above the fleet, leaving a trail of smoke behind them. As he enjoyed the sea breeze, he wrote a thesis in his mind. The title was Report on the Barbaric Behavior and Cruel Actions of the Vilestrian Natives. These dark-skinned natives are ignorant, bad-tempered, bad-mannered, and have a pungent smell. They are tall and large, and their clothes do not cover their bodies. They will never allow benevolent and gentle people to approach them. Politeness annoys them, kindness infuriates them, and any rational behavior will only incur their wrath. To an outsider, they are like a black bear stealing honey and finding a bee flying into its captain, a sailor reminded softly. They mainly rely on expressions, pictures, and gestures to communicate with the outside world. Among these methods, the latter is often the easiest to understand. Even though we found that there should be some kind of language between the natives during our investigation, in reality, Captain, the sailor's voice grew louder, covering the waves, the sea breeze, and the roaring of the boiler. We are about to enter the port. Crinder snapped out of his thoughts and looked up. The sea was still boundless, but he could feel that the blue sea on both sides was narrowing. In the distant sky, he seemed to see some dark shadows. There were many signs that indicated that they were returning to Iradia. For example, the spellcaster's ability had reappeared, the magic communication between the warships had returned to normal, and Princess Blakesia had become energetic again. A month ago, they had reconnected with the central command of the Empire's western coast. Since then, the ground forces had continued to provide communication support. Based on the sea map, weather, and speed that both sides shared, the Empire's grass fleet would be able to successfully reach the western coast's military port before sunset. In the next hour, many sailors boarded the deck in anticipation. Blakesia also rose into the sky from time to time. She did not seem to be in a good condition. Her already bony body was even thinner, but her spirit was surprisingly good. After entering Vilestrian in the second half of the voyage, she had lost most of her power and dove into the cold and damp bottom of the ship to sleep. Halfway through the return journey, the vigorous magic power in her body became active again, and Blakesia gradually regained her strength. Now, the excitement and eagerness of returning home captured this little female dragon. She could not wait to see Caesar, Garin, Angramo, and the new city that belonged to her. Crinder's inspiration as he approached the northern coast. He had already added a few pages to his thesis. He had to describe the Vilestrian natives in detail as much as he could, and at the same time, with the greatest amount of malice, so that the royal court would believe that building a friendly relationship with the natives was just empty talk, so they could focus to use force to expand the Empire's fleet's fleet. Part of Crinder's decision was correct, but part of it was due to his own selfish motives. As the commander-in-chief of the voyage fleet, he was naturally happy to see the Blackwing Empire's naval strength continue to grow. The pursuit of power, wealth, authority, and status was only one of his goals. Personally witnessing a fleet that could cover the sky and cover the sun was the scene that Crinder was looking forward to. Monopolizing Aladia's naval supremacy was also the lifelong goal of every sailor. If there was a chance, he would definitely fight for it with all his might. Moreover, he didn't think that he was exaggerating. The natives of Vilister who were passionate about tribal warfare and cannibalism couldn't be considered humans. In his thesis, the only word he used to describe them was they. Woo! The crew heard the sound from afar and looked in that direction curiously. They pointed and chatted excitedly. That was the sound of the Northern Dawn flagship. As the last main warship to be handed over to the Navy, the Northern Dawn was larger than the Empire's grasp and the breath of the Sacred Dragon. It was also equipped with more complicated weapons systems and a better crew system. Its area of responsibility was the coastal waters of the empire, and it bore the heavy responsibility of protecting the entire Northern Empire. The Northern Dawn was painted in a clear white color. From afar, it looked like a sacred island that stretched across the sea. They were almost there. The voyage fleet quickly spread out and began to decelerate. The scouting ships, corvettes, and supply ships all slowed down to the lowest speed possible and formed a vertical formation, allowing the Empire's grasp to leave them in the dust. They wanted to let their main ship enter the western coast port first. This was a kind of honor and also a kind of symbol. On the other side, the ground crew in the dock was making the final preparations. When they saw the huge body of the ocean-going main ship appear in their field of vision, the technicians began to shout loudly. The gates were opened amidst the creaking of gears and hinges, and the 12 connecting ships left the dock at full speed. They circled around the Empire's grasp, helping it to control its speed and adjust its final course. There was no sound at the port. This was not the bustling West Coast port that people knew, but another West Coast, a heavily guarded military port of the Empire. The expected scene of people lining the streets to welcome, bathing in flowers, and cheering did not exist here. There were only dedicated staff and solemn troops at the port. However, there were officials who recorded the scene of the Empire's grasp arriving at the port with a record crystal, waiting for a later announcement. Crendo came out from his cabin and led the crew down the escalator in an orderly manner to board the docking ship. In another direction, many workers, as well as boar people, red lotus goblins, and humans from the main dock immediately boarded the Empire's grasp. They were in charge of unloading the unnecessary goods on the warship and carrying out a 3-month inspection and maintenance of the entire voyage fleet. After being transferred by the docking ship, Crendo Statham finally stepped on a solid land. He took a deep breath, and the familiar dry and hot air of the northern lands seeped into his heart. The heat that had annoyed him in the past was now filled with intimacy and joy. Crendo, who had returned to the northern lands, had many things to do. However, before that, he had to complete one thing: an audience with the Empire's emperor. The teleportation circle was ready to reach the Blackwing Palace. Crendo had never enjoyed such treatment before, and his expression was a little unnatural. To be honest, it was impossible to say that he was not nervous. Even he did not believe it. Emperor Black Dragon was the highest ruler of the entire Northern Empire, and also one of the most powerful existences in Iradia. Majestic, powerful, mysterious, cruel. A single word could not describe him. Countless legends have been spread across the continent with Tangerine's name as the starting point. Mortals could only see bits and pieces of information unintentionally revealed through the fog, and just these small details were enough to make them tremble in fear and lose sleep at night. That was the Dragon King, who controlled life and death, power and strength. Additionally, Crendo did not forget that he had angered Black Shia with the sea monster Prodoc's decision, which had ultimately attracted the Emperor's attention. At that time, Emperor Black Dragon did not say anything, but very few people could understand his true thoughts. Crendo guessed that it was because they were in the middle of a mission and His Majesty did not want to interfere. Now, if the court wanted to settle the score, there was no way for him to escape punishment. The Empire is with me. Crendo looked at his watch and sorted out his thoughts. He took a deep breath and finally stepped into the teleportation circle. Chapter 420. The floor of the court was light-colored, and the deeper one went, the darker it became until it was pure black. The military boots would make crisp echoes when they stepped on the marble floor. The guards here were all dragonkin who had been strengthened by radiation. They didn't look much different from real, pure-blooded dragonkin. They were just as big and strong as they were. Crendo didn't look around and walked forward carefully. After turning a corner, there was a long and wide marble corridor with beautiful patterns. It wasn't difficult to pass through the long corridor of the Imperial Court. The difficult part was passing through the corridor with so many dragonkin around. Fortunately, Crendo was able to keep his composure and didn't show any signs of embarrassment. Just as he was about to step into the hall, he saw a high-ranking imperial official who happened to be coming out. Ryan. The half-lich seemed to have received some kind of reward. He seemed to be in a good mood. The soul fire in his eye sockets flickered. When he brushed past Crendo, he muttered Angramo, but nodded at him in a friendly manner. This calmed Crendo's nerves considerably. The lizardmen guards pushed open the tall and heavy door for him. After he walked through, the stone door closed with a bang. Commander of the Voyage Fleet, Captain of the Empire, Crendo Statham, greets you, Your Majesty. Your Majesty is supreme. Crendo knelt on one knee with his left hand on his chest and his right hand holding the commander's sword in front of him. This was the way imperial soldiers greeted each other. You haven't even raised your head. How do you know my Majesty is supreme? A burst of laughter came from the throne in front of him. The sound reminded Crendo of thunder when dark clouds gathered on the sea. Rise, Commander. I'm glad to see you back. Crendo stood up and raised his head. His pupils constricted and dilated before returning to normal. He suppressed the waves of shock that surged in his heart when he saw the true dragon. I think we have a lot to talk about, Commander. While he was carefully sizing up the dragon was also sizing him up. Crendo guessed that the Emperor needed some time to remember him because he had to meet so many people every day. We successfully landed on Villister on the 27th of the year 1660 and explored the new continent for 180 days. The Voyage Fleet brought back hundreds of detailed information. I've also submitted a report to the court. I hope it won't disappoint you, Your Majesty, Crendo said calmly. All right, I guess I'll go and see it. Black Dragon seemed to be troubled by the written reports and information. He rubbed his head and changed the topic. But before that, I want to hear your description, Commander. What did my fleet encounter when we discovered the new continent? Also, what do you think of Villister? There are many things that happened during this time. If Your Majesty is willing to listen, I would be more than happy to tell you all about it. But before that, there's something I have to explain to you. Our fleet can reach Villister. Isn't that obvious? No, Your Majesty. This is something only the great Northern Empire can do. Crendo licked his lips. The familiar topic made him confident. His speech became smooth and confident. As everyone knows, Villister is a place where magic is hated. According to our observations, the dead magic zone has already begun to appear 10,000 miles away from Loster. This means that the other nations of Iradia, such as the empire on which the sun never sets, the trading city-states, and the Hegian nations, can't sail into Villister using warships powered by magic. To reach that place, these nations can only rely on ancient sailing ships. But we're different. Even though we encountered all sorts of problems along the way, and the stability of the warship without the help of magic technology is questionable, with the combined efforts of the crew, the Empire's grasp finally sailed into the coastal waters of Villister. As he said this, Crendo's eyes shone with pride. You're saying that currently, there are no other nations of Iradia that can compete with the Empire for Villister, right? It will be the same in the future, Crendo said with certainty. I know that the other nations will also learn and think of ways to copy. But as long as the Empire doesn't change its support for the docks and workshops, the Northern Empire will always be one level ahead of them in terms of core non-magic warfare technology. Our fleet will also always be one generation ahead of them, or even more. Maybe. Caesar nodded casually, looking like he didn't care. He knew very well that in the Third Era, steam power was not a difficult problem to overcome. If the Northern Empire wanted to truly form a technological barrier against the other nations, they would have to wait until they entered the era of internal combustion. This was the problem that the Northern Empire was currently facing, and it required time to accumulate. The Black Dragon gestured with his large jaw, indicating that Crendo could sit down on the metal chairs at the two sides of the hall. However, there was no way he was expecting someone to pour him tea. Many of the rules and etiquette in the court were based on the habits of dragons, which was very different from that of humans. Even so, when the imperial officials had the opportunity to learn about this, they would compete to imitate it, striving to make their etiquette somewhat similar to that of the dragons. If one were to make a bold guess, If the black dragon were to publicly express its fondness for long-legged human girls one day, then the status of long-legged girls everywhere would immediately rise, and they would be pursued. This could also be considered a disguised form of worship. Crendo sheathed his commanding sword and sat down on a chair suitable for humans. The two sides of the court had a variety of designs, and some were clearly not made for humans. He continued, "Although Villister is a land of hatred for magic, the climate is mild, the land is fertile, and the products are abundant. I have to admit that the land there is more fertile than the Northlands. The terrain is also flat, and it's suitable for large areas of land to cultivate farms, pastures, and plantations." The Black Emperor's claw tapped lightly on the metal chair, producing the sound of metal hitting metal. "I know about this. There are similar records in the reports of other nations on Villister. The shapeshifters told me about it. How about this? Tell me about the ecology of Villister and the native species." Similar to the investigations of other countries, there are an unknown number of indigenous people in Villister. They have red eyes, black skin, and sparse hair. They are tall and strong, generally more than 2 meters tall. Their physique is similar to that of the orcs. "Our crew calls them little giants," Lucian said. "Have you had any contact with them?" Caesar asked. "We try to have friendly interactions with them," Crendo said, lowering his head. Kendo lowered his head. "But it's very difficult. No matter how we encounter them, the natives will immediately attack us with bones, spears, and arrows. Some of the warriors of the natives are strong, while others are weak. The few coastal tribes that we've come into contact with seem to worship a god called a Tuso, and the tribal warriors gain strength through bloody sacrifices. Later, we searched through all the books related to the gods, but we couldn't find a Tuso's name. This is a fake god that doesn't exist." "It could also be an evil god," Crendo said. Through Crendo's description, Caesar had a rough understanding of the natives of Villister, and he had a first impression of them in his mind. Chapter 421. "Perhaps you're right," Chrono replied. He coughed for a while before continuing, "But we haven't found anything with energy in Villister yet. Magic, elemental, innate gifts, and bloodlines, the so-called powers of Eladia, seem to have disappeared. Gods and demons don't exist. While the beasts on the continent are huge and ferocious, they can be easily killed by ordinary life forms with sharp fangs and claws." Caesar looked down at him silently. Most of the black dragon's body was curled up in the shadow of the huge throne, only revealing his head, neck, and forelimbs. Even so, he was still frighteningly huge. "You made it clear enough. Let's talk about the natives of Villister. Didn't you bring them back? Didn't the voyage fleet take any prisoners?" "At first, we had 30 natives as captives," Cronor said with a troubled expression. "But when we returned from Villister, the captives were cursed by a strange curse. They became violent, coughed up blood, had black spots on their skin, and festered on their bodies. Then they died in batches. Before they died, they madly chanted the word Egon. According to some of the sailors who had been learning the native language, this was another god worshipped by the natives of Villister, a false god that didn't exist. They believed that the curse was a punishment for leaving Villister and prayed for the god's protection and forgiveness. There aren't any living captives." Black Dragon's eyes were no longer as gentle. He knew that it wasn't a curse, but a plague. However, he couldn't explain it to Cronor in such a short time. "Also, what about the fleet slaves? They were cursed as well. After discovering this, we immediately accelerated away from Villister. 5 days later, the spellcasters and priests regained their abilities. Some of the crew members who were cursed were also treated immediately. At the same time, we left 5 captives behind. They're currently being escorted to the palace by the guards. Do you plan to see them?" Cronor asked. "Bring one in and let me see," Caesar said. While the battle lizardmen guards went to pass on the order, Kendo reminded, "Your Majesty, these natives are stupid and crude barbarians. They don't know what respect is, so please don't let the battle lizardmen unlock their chains. There's no guarantee that they won't do anything bloody." "Are you worried about my safety?" "Commander, The black dragon chuckled. Crendo realized that there was something wrong with his words, so he quickly stood up and bowed again. To protect the dignity of the court, the chains clanged against the marble floor. Under the watchful eyes of the lizard men, a native of Wylus strode into the hall with heavy steps. He was a male native, and his hands and feet were shackled. His collarbone was pierced by a chain, and there was a patch of dry blood there. This man was about 3 meters tall. His skin was dark and shiny, and his muscles were bulging. His curly hair stuck close to his scalp, as if he was wearing a black hood. He had no beard, and his face was gray, and his teeth were dark yellow. "Hello, captive." Caesar opened his mouth and only said one word before the captive's eyes widened. The whites of his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He stared at Black Dragon with trembling eyes and stumbled back a few steps before falling to the ground. Incomprehensible words came out of his mouth. "Egon, Egon, Atuso, Palamora." Then, the native of Wylus sat on the ground. His legs twitched violently, and his body froze. Crendo hurriedly walked over. The battle lizard man beside him also lowered his head to take a look, then leaned forward to sniff. He raised his head and said to the black dragon, "There's no smell of living things." "Master, he's dead." "Huh?" Caesar was stunned. It was the first time he knew that he could scare someone to death. Even though he looked a little repulsive from a human's point of view, it wasn't to this extent. He didn't even release his draconic aura. Your Majesty." Cronor was a little embarrassed. According to his description, the natives were very savage and fierce. However, based on the captive's reaction, they were more like cowardly and useless kobolds. They were even worse than kobolds. Even though kobolds would cry and poop, at least they wouldn't be scared to death. "Forget it." Black Dragon glanced at the native's corpse and then at Cronor. "You don't have to bring the other captives. Battle lizardmen, drag this one away. You can continue to tell me about Wylus." Wylus is a land of gold and silver. This isn't an exaggeration. Just by surveying the mountains along the coast, our prospectors found large amounts of ore veins that could be mined, Cronor said. Many years ago, Iradia and the other nations discovered this. They also had plans to mine Wylus and were eager to give it a try. However, most of these nations failed. The dead magic areas and calm zones near Wylus made it difficult for them to move. Any adventurers who wanted to land on the continent had to pay with their lives. But we are different. To the Northern Empire, Wylus is a land that gives what they want. Your Majesty, I have already drafted a plan to conquer the new continent for the court to review. After saying so much, Cronor finally revealed his true thoughts. As long as we control the estuary and build ports and fortresses along the coast, it will be very easy for our fleet to enter and leave Wylus. Conquer. It seems like you have the intention to make the Empire go to war with Wylus. Why do you have such thoughts? To you humans, isn't invading a foreign land an intolerable evil act? Caesar's voice sounded like he was laughing, but it soon became serious. Also, do you know how much money we will need to invest in the early stages of the plan to conquer the ocean? A prolonged war might cause the Empire, which is already in trouble, to collapse. Conquering Wylus will only bring benefits to the Empire. In the eyes of the Empire's citizens, our country is righteous. Also, history books have never judged a country to be righteous or evil. There are only victories and defeats, strong or weak, Cronor said firmly. He then answered Caesar's second question. It is precisely because the Empire is in trouble that I can't wait to propose the Wylus strategy to you. No matter the time, colonization and plunder are the fastest ways to accumulate wealth. As for the initial investment needed to start the colonization plan, Your Majesty, I am willing to guarantee with my life that this will definitely be a profitable investment. The Empire's returns will be tens of times more than the initial investment. Conquering across the ocean, why does it feel like déjà vu? Caesar mumbled and finally made a decision. I know your personal suggestion. The court will conduct a detailed review, analysis, and discussion on the Villister investigation report you submitted. I will announce the strategic plan for Villister after listening to the court's discussion. All right, the long journey is also a form of torture. Commander, you may go and rest. At your command, your majesty. Kroner bowed, took 5 steps back, and turned to leave. Chapter 422. Caesar already had an answer in his heart when the court's discussion on the conquest of Ilost had just begun. However, while the efficiency of the empire was much higher than that of a city-state or council system, it would still take a long time to prepare for such a long conquest across the sea. Finalizing the strategy, investing funds, developing equipment, expanding the fleet, selecting people, all of these had to be done gradually. After all, the empire was still unable to announce the plans for Vilos to the public, so the burden of development fell on the empire's shoulders. However, this was only temporary. Caesar pondered for a while. When the empire truly controlled the estuaries of Vilost and built Blackwing ports, castles, and fortresses on the new continent, the next step of the plan could be carried out, to guide the people into this project. When that time came, as long as he spread the word and let the people believe that crossing the sea to seek wealth was as valuable as achieving success on the battlefield, and that they could indeed gain wealth and status from this project, the colonists of the northern lands would soon flock over to help the Blackwing Empire expand its territory. Let's begin the preparations. After issuing a few orders, the Black Dragon slowly crawled out of the dark and gloomy palace. The voyage fleet arrived at the port earlier than expected. When Krender finished his report, it was already dusk. The sea of flowers reflected the sunset. The thick clouds in the sky were golden as if they were burning. The western horizon was an orange-red color. The sun was half hidden below the mountains, spreading out layers of light above Caesar's head. A crescent moon was about to appear, quiet and tranquil. A gentle breeze blew through the sea of flowers, stirring up colorful waves. Garin was sleeping in the sea of flowers with his head buried in the haystack, snoring after snoring. Not far away, a few shy little creatures poked their heads out from under the curly leaves of the Yanan flowers. They looked at the Black Dragon from afar with fear and curiosity. Caesar smiled at them. These were Luna's tribesmen, the forest fairies. Ever since the wedding between the Black Dragon and the forest fairies had ended, some of the fairies had boldly entered the Blackwing Empire and entered the royal court. Caesar welcomed them. At the very least, the fairies were not annoying. They were much more pleasing to the eye than the gnomes, jackals, beastmen, half-dragons, manticores, demonic earthworms, and flying centaurs. He squatted down beside the sleeping Garin and took out a small bottle of wine, about 3 meters in diameter, from his psionic space. He closed his eyes and took small sips. This was the midsummer brewed by the master brewer, Giragast. Ever since his defeat in the Elegy card game, Giragast had gotten himself a good job in the Empire and was now living in the north with his friends. Caesar sat and watched the sky slowly darken. A series of dull footsteps could be heard on the walkway to the royal court. The fairies were so frightened that they screamed and fled the scene, hiding in their secret huts in the sea of flowers. This movement also attracted Caesar's attention. The Black Dragon turned his head with an unpleasant expression. The Wyvern guard quickly walked over and said that there was a person who looked quite powerful asking for an audience. Caesar was slightly surprised. He did not know who would come to visit at the end of the night. He signaled the Wyvern guard to let the person in while he waited here. The person who came was indeed unexpected. They had met not long ago in other places. In a sense, they had even fought side by side. He did not expect this person to come here. It was the gilded wildfire, the legendary Guron Kale, Doramplet Stannis. Garin's nose twitched. The strong and unfamiliar scent would cause the body to have an instinctive reaction. The young dragon, whose body was almost 15 meters long, shuddered and woke up from his sleep. Stannis, Monet has been dealt with. I hope you have other reasons to visit at this time. As soon as the person stood still, Caesar said with an unpleasant expression, "You have disturbed my dear brother's sleep. The 9-headed giant serpent is only one of Monet's many derivatives." Stannis said hurriedly. When he heard Caesar's words, he only glanced at Garen. He did not even have time to think about why there was such a huge gap between the two brothers. The real Monet is still in the Bramble Mountain. He has already broken free from the seal and broken out of the ground. Catastrophe. Is that so? Caesar nodded lightly. Thank you for your hard work. You did not have to specially inform me. You still don't understand? Black Dragon. Stannis took a deep breath and decided to go straight to the point. Euchre here is one of Monet's sealed artifacts. It is because of its absence that this terrifying monster broke free from its restraints. As he spoke, the golden dragon used a spell to replay the scene to Caesar. In the darkness without any stars or moon, an aurora burst out from the depths of the mountains. At first, it was only a thin line that pierced through the sky. Then, it quickly expanded into a pillar of light that was difficult to look at directly. The void rumbled and the mountains trembled. When the pillar of light disappeared, the place immediately collapsed. The rivers in the entire mountain range converged towards the center, as if nourishing a spring that was about to break out of the ground. As the trembling intensified, cracks appeared on the ground. The black cracks were filled with viscous black magma. The fission of the earth. Caesar sighed softly. Scarlet mist gushed out from the black cracks. The magma flowed out from the ground. Along with the magma, there were slender creatures that appeared. They looked like dragons without scales and wings. Their bodies glowed with a metallic luster, and their pupils were a ferocious gold. They crawled on the ground that was full of cracks, twisting their slender lower bodies. However, as they crawled, they suddenly jumped up and leaped in all directions. Look, they are creatures that have died long ago. They are not undead. Stannis pointed out to him. Only a small portion of these snakes and dragons were intact. Some of them were missing half of their heads. Some of them had holes in their abdomens. Most of them had fatal wounds on their bodies, but they were still moving. More and more dragons and snakes crawled out of the ground and crawled, reminiscent of thousands of earthworms crawling out of the soil in spring. Then a bottomless crack appeared, and thousands of tons of magma, soil, and stones poured into the crack. Something huge was struggling in the lava. Its scales were indigo, and its back was full of sharp bone spikes. Hundreds of black iron chains pierced through its body, firmly locking it underground. However, the iron chains could no longer restrain it. Thousands of snakes and dragons began to move towards the camera. They realized that there was a living creature in this place. Stannis' location had been discovered. However, this was not the most important thing. The most important thing was that the chains on the monster in the crack were breaking one by one. The air around the monster formed a tornado. Countless snakes and dragons stopped and raised their heads, screaming excitedly. At this moment, the image stopped abruptly. I ran away before Monet completely broke free of the seal, Stannis explained calmly. That aura terrified me. I realized that I could not do anything alone. I could only run as fast as I could, as far as I could. Chapter 423. Caesar didn't know how strong the monster that could make the golden dragon say, "I ran away," so righteously was, but he believed that the gap between them was not small. As for what the real Monet was and what level he had reached, nobody knew for sure. I remembered those snakes and dragons. On the way to the north, I tried to find traces of those things in my memory and finally found something. They have their own name, viper dragons, creatures of a lost era. Stannis said in a low voice, "Unlike the netherlings that were bred by derivatives, these living dead creatures have been preserved together with Monet to this day. They have been processed by Quell Doreai's forbidden technology and have retained a certain level of consciousness. Their bodies and bones are even tougher than before they died. Compared to them, monsters and revenants are nothing. These things are the real killing machines. Quell Doreai is indeed a crazy race." Caesar agreed. "They are crazy enough to scare you, if you have seen them," Stannis said. "These viper dragons are now under Monet's command. The netherlings, the snake-scorpion servants, the thorn flower hunters. All the creatures were mutated because of him. He is the ultimate creation of Quell Dorii. Now no one in Iradia can control this giant beast. He will bring great disaster to this continent. You have to help me. You mean Monet will bring disaster to the continent? So you want me to help you get rid of him? Caesar repeated the golden dragon's words and then expressed his doubts. But shouldn't you be looking for the silver dragon, red copper dragon, green copper dragon, brass dragon, and even your human allies? Why are you looking for me, a black dragon? The disaster started because of you, Stannis said solemnly. I was the one who took Euchre here. Caesar reached out his claw and touched Garen's head casually. But since Euchre here appeared in the Thorn Mountain range, it means that there is a problem with the seal. If I didn't take it, the red dragon, blue dragon, green dragon, or others would have taken it away. Monet would have escaped sooner or later. Don't you understand this? Golden dragon. Towards the end, Black Dragon's tone became more and more severe. That was indeed the case. Stannis choked. He could neither argue nor refute this. After pausing for a while, the Golden Dragon's voice softened. Monet's individual strength is too strong. His army is too many, and his spawns are too many. If we don't act in time, this will be a disaster that will affect the entire Iradia. It will be difficult for the Metal Dragons to stop it alone. We need your help. Monet is a disaster, but Aslier's isn't. Back then, when the Blackwing Empire and the Abyssal Lord were fighting to the death, I didn't see anyone helping us. Caesar said sarcastically, then lowered his head and asked, right? Garen. He had just woken up not too long ago and was still wondering if Blakesia had returned. He had no idea what the Monet derivative and dragon centipede that Caesar and the Golden Dragon were talking about were. However, this did not affect Garen's judgment. When he saw Caesar's dark golden pupils, he immediately nodded vigorously. That's right. Looks like it was a mistake for me to come here. I should have let that beautiful silver dragon, Inico, come. Stannis complained in his heart. It was a difficult problem to find a way to convince the Black Dragon Emperor. However, he was the Golden Dragon, and the Golden Dragon would never admit defeat easily. Stannis decided to regroup and find another way to consider this problem from the perspective of a ruler. I'm very sorry about Aslier's. However, helping the Metal Dragons now is also helping yourself. The Golden Dragon quickly activated his Persuader mode. Monet lost control the moment he escaped. He only had revenge in his mind, against all races that are not Quell Dorii. In his eyes, all living creatures are murderers. He will attack, enslave, and corrupt all life within his sight. His goal is to bury the entire Iradia with the dead Quell Dorii. As he spoke, he tilted his head slightly. After a short wait, he continued to speak. I just received news from my family. Nearly half of the EBS kingdom has fallen in a day. Emperor Black Dragon, think about it. After destroying the few pitiful small countries around it, will Monet directly launch an attack on the north? Or will he cross the continuous Tyreth Mountains and the Midland Sea to attack the trading city-states? Or will he attack the more remote Hudgian kingdom? You want to tell me that Monet will pose a huge threat to the Blackwing Empire, right? Caesar sneered and asked, but have you ever thought that I am the chaotic and evil Black Dragon? Why can't I pull Monet and Aslier's together to get rid of the Rising Sun City and destroy the world together? Do you think I will have so many scruples? Stannis was stunned for a long time. He had always speculated about the Black Dragon Emperor from the perspective of the Metal Dragons, but did not consider that the other party was not the protector of the world. There is no need for him to devote himself to the cause of protecting Iradia. Leaving and abandoning a world was not difficult for the Penishade dragons. The Gold Dragon thought about this issue for a long time. When the last light of the sun disappeared and the night silently shrouded the wilderness, he solemnly said, I thought that a dragon who would establish a country like the Blackwing Empire and marry a forest sprite would not have the idea of destroying the world. I think you can understand the will of the Metal Dragons and will fight side by side with them to protect the world. Don't say that. I'm not familiar with the Platinum Dragon God, and my relationship with the Metal Dragons is not as good as you think. The Black Dragon raised his right claw and said, Caesar, help us clean up Monet, Stannis said in a low voice. We will write off the matter of the Blackwing Empire's rotten metal dragon eggs. In the future, as long as you do not use the children of true dragons for experiments, we will not interfere with you. This is also His Majesty Bahamut's intention. Caesar looked at him and scratched his chin. At this point, as long as I want to, you can't interfere. Stannis took a few steps forward and looked up into the huge black dragon's eyes. What do you want? As long as it does not go against the teachings of the Platinum Dragon God. I have dealt with the metal dragons so many times, and this is the third time the metal dragons have stepped into the Blackwing Empire. Caesar calmly said, the first time was when you made me believe in Bahamut. The second time was when the silver dragon Enigorn made me help deal with the Penishade dragons. The third time was when you made me help deal with Monet. I remember that the Empire had once sent out invitations to all races, and the friendly laws towards the metal dragons were clearly written in the Codex. However, to this day, not a single metal dragon was willing to settle down in the Blackwing Empire. Moreover, this is a country of dragons, and I have even fought alongside you. For this matter, if it was any other country, tribe, or clan that maintained a friendly relationship with the Empire that asked for help, I would help. However, you have never wanted my friendship and have never planned to have anything to do with the Blackwing Empire. Stannis reluctantly explained, the Blackwing Empire structure is diverse and its relationships are complicated. The metal dragons believe in kindness, fairness, and justice. We do not want to be involved in matters that may go against the path we are pursuing. Understand. Avoid any form of interaction with evil to prevent evil from contaminating you. Caesar nodded in agreement. But now you have found me and asked me to help you clean up the remnants of the lost era. You do not use a pleading tone at all, as if everything is natural. You do not treat me as a friend, nor do you have any respect for me. You don't even know that you should address the ruler of an empire as your majesty. The black dragon lowered his head and stared at Stannis' ancient and magnificent body. When Luna and I held our wedding, the Empire tried its best to send the wedding invitation to every metal dragon that could be found. However, not a single dragon accepted the invitation to enter the Northern Empire and go to Galanaud. That includes you, Gold Dragon Stannis. Sometimes I wonder, what kind of attitude should I use to treat you bunch of damn metal dragons? Tiamat saw me as a different species, but is Bahamut not the same? Garen crawled on the ground with his 4 limbs, folded his wings, and opened his scales. Acid dripped from his mouth as he assumed an attacking posture. He realized that his brother might be angry, and the culprit was this annoying golden dragon in front of him. Under the gaze of the black dragon, Stannis' originally straight back gradually bent. His arrogant head slowly lowered. I apologize to you on behalf of the Metal Dragon clan for what happened before. Your Majesty Tangerine. Very well. I may need the help of the Metal Dragon clan in the future, but there may not be such a day. Caesar used his tail to touch the gold dragon's tail. This was a dragon's way of expressing goodwill, but now I am facing a dilemma. I need the Platinum Dragon God's help. If you can help me solve this problem, I can lead the Blackwing clan to start a crusade against Monet. What problem? The Curse of the Beastmen. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.